There we go.
Just sure we're ready.
Okay, welcome members and people in the gallery to the 27th or 72nd, meeting of the Committee for Finance and the 22 to 27 mandate. As always, we'll be broadcasting Parliament buildings and online. Should you wish to use a mobile, put it on airplane mode or silent. Agenda item 1, apologies. We have no apologies. We have several members who will at some point be joining us on Zoom. A couple have joined us already. But we are queried at the minute. Agenda item 2, declaration of interests. Members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest ahead of each committee meeting as applicable. Does anybody have an interest they wish to declare? No. Agenda item 3, chairperson's business. 3.1 is a summary of legislation considered by this committee since our establishment in the current mandate, which I think is significant. Someone requested that at the last week's meeting, so it's there to note, unless anybody wishes to talk about it. 3.2, House of Commons Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, implementation monitoring of public inquiry recommendations. That's at page 11 of the meeting pack. The committee has been copied into correspondence from the House of Commons Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. The committee recently launched an inquiry into the recommendations of the Infected Blood Inquiry, specifically their recommendations on responding to calls for public inquiries and scrutiny of implementation of public inquiry recommendations. As part of this, it wishes to consider how Westminster scrutiny can complement and respect the scrutiny mechanisms of devolved parliaments. That's quite unusual and a pleasant surprise for them to be engaging us. Anyway, the clerk wants to say anything about this, but we could presumably come back with...
Yeah, we'll come back with anything we need to, Chair, and liaising with the PAC clerk on
Okay.
this.
Are members content that we await more information from the clerk and we can decide how to proceed? Are they content with that?
Thank you.
3.3, Inter-Parliamentary Finance Committee Legacy Report. Members, that's at page 14 of the meeting pack. As you will know, the Inter-Parliamentary Finance Committee Forum is made up of finance committees from the devolved parliaments in the UK and considers issues of mutual concern. We held a meeting here this time last year, or actually March last year. As the current term draws to a close in Scotland and Wales, obviously their parliaments break up very soon for elections. We agreed to produce a legacy report earlier today, which dealt with things we had looked at and issues that could be taken forward for future versions of the forum. Earlier today, the clerk and I met with other chairpersons and agreed the contents of the report, which has now been shared with all of you for your information. Scottish and Welsh committees are considering this as an informal report and publishing it online. Members, I think I'll just say in brief, this actually has been, lots of these things are, as it were, talking shops, but I actually do find this one a useful forum for us to meet, in particular on questions that are inherently shared between devolved finance committees, such as how fiscal frameworks and Barnett works, that they're inherently linked, and indeed how engagement with the Treasury works. And I think we've been able to make a bit of progress certainly on the latter in terms of engagement with the Treasury. So I think there'll be important work to take forward with new counterparts in the chairs whenever they are elected. So if members are agreed, we'll publish that legacy report on the website of the committee. People content?
Thank you.
Okay. Agenda item 4, draft minutes from last week. They're page 27 of the meeting pack. If members are content with the draft minutes, I will sign them. Everyone's content? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Agenda item 5, matters arising. First is a Dallow readout response on procurement updates. On the 21st of January 2026, the committee asked the Department for updates on various issues discussed during an oral briefing from procurement officials. The Department has indicated that they are content to provide updates, so they will provide those updates. We aren't getting an update yet, but they've said they're content to provide us with updates. 5.2, Executive Office Review of ALBs and of arm's length bodies and the arm's length body landscape. That's at page 39 of the meeting pack. The First and Deputy First Minister have replied to this committee's correspondence regarding the review of ALBs and the landscape review. They highlight that TO fully supports the DOF-led review and will provide all requested information to enable reporting by the end of April 26. TO has also provided relevant information for the ALB pay landscape review and we'll work with the Department of Finance to take that forward. Related is 5.3, which is correspondence from the Minister of Communities regarding the ALB pay landscape review. A similar vein, the Communities Minister has written to us to reply to our correspondence regarding reviews. He confirms that his officials are engaging with the Department of Finance, and he says that he understands the Finance Minister will bring these reviews to the Executive in early 2026. I'm not clear what early 2026 means, whether it's in the next week or two or June the 30th, but anyway. Members will recall similar correspondence from other Executive Ministers considered at the meeting on the 14th of January. At that time, this committee requested a full list of ALBs from the department and agreed to circulate it to other statutory committees. We haven't got that yet. We will hopefully at some point. We have an oral briefing scheduled for the 20th of May. So this is to note unless anybody desperately wants to comment on it until the 20th of May. Well, it may come up again before then, but we have an oral briefing on the 20th of May, which is several months off, obviously. 5.4, correspondence from the Communities Committee regarding the Advice NI request relating to implementation of the two-child limit removal. That is at page 43 of your meeting pack. On Thursday, members will recall that we wrote to the Communities Committee in relation to the implementation of the two-child limit. This followed a consideration of correspondence on 14th of January. The Communities Committee has informed this committee that Advice NI will be attending its committee on the 29th of January to give evidence on the LCM, Universal Credit Removal of Two-Child Limit Bill. Other relevant stakeholders will also be attending this meeting to allow the Communities Committee to agree its position on this LCM. So that's members to note, which we expect to be kept abreast of it, although I know they were voting on, I presume it was on this exact bill last night in the Commons. Okay, 5.5. Sorry, go ahead.
Just on that, at some stage, I think we should be asking what the actual cost has been in terms of, which I presume will come out of the block grant. So whilst the removal of the two-child limit it's welcome that it's been made at Westminster, it has an impact on the benefit cap, which is a mitigation that Northern Ireland Assembly is applying. So, as I say, those who will receive additional payments is welcome, but it means that there will be more going above the benefit cap, which is mitigated from the block grant.
Yeah.
So I think we should get an assessment. We should ask the department for assessment of what the actual additional cost.
We have a query in, Chair.
Yeah, I think I did raise this before. And others.
I think it's already been asked. So we're expecting that information along with the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. 5.5 is from the Association of British Insurers and relates to tackling motor insurance costs for young drivers. That's at page 46 of the meeting pack. The ABI has copied the committee into a briefing note compiled to assist members in a future plenary debate on the cost of insurance for young drivers. I'm not sure when this is happening, but it's to note, other than to say, it's probably worth us just saying very briefly to the ABI that it would be helpful for the committee, given we've taken a bit of an interest in this in the past, if they could keep us posted on whether the graduated driving licence changes which were introduced here in the last week are going to have a cost-saving impact for young drivers in Northern Ireland, and if not, why not? Dan Forsyth, Deputy Chair.
The exact same point as you just said, Chair. I was just going to ask if we were liaising with that. Can we ask, has there been any engagement or commitment around young drivers insurance here with the graduate licence scheme? So no support you on that. Thank you.
Great, sounds good. 5.6 is the 54th report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules. As members will recall from last week, the 54th report, it does not need, there's nothing to be drawn to special attention to the Assembly, that's to note. Now we're going to go to the tabled pack. So this is quite an important one. 5.7 is from the Department of Finance. It relates to the local growth fund, which is hugely important, obviously, to, I think, community involuntary organisations in all of our constituencies. A copy of the report, which is a copy of the report of a review of the economic and activity aspect of the Shared Prosperity Fund, the short-lived Shared Prosperity Fund. It only was around for a couple of years. This report was compiled by Innovation Consultancy Services, commissioned by the Department to conduct a review of the economic and activity aspect of the UK SPF. Is that by the Department of Finance?
Yes, Chair.
Yes. Okay. To review the economic and inactivity aspect of the SPF in NI. The report was intended to support the development and delivery of the UKG's Local Growth Fund here. The Department indicate that this report will provide valuable information going forward. Now, members will be well aware that the Local Growth Fund and the Minister's ongoing and the efforts or the Minister's engagement with the UK government on this has been urgent, and indeed our correspondence and our pressure on it has been urgent. Obviously, there was a demonstration by community and voluntary sector outside the building a fortnight ago today. So it is hugely important, given that people are already being placed or have already been placed in protective notice. Very significant pressures. I mean, last week I had a meeting in my own constituency with Belfast Works Connect, which includes people from across the city, including north, south, east and west. The department now indicates in their correspondence with us that given NIHF delays, that's the UK Department, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Growth, Local Government, delays, it was decided that it will continue to deliver the resource element of the Local Growth Fund in 26-27. It is intended that the Executive will manage all elements of the fund from April 27, and collaborative working between departments, local partners and Whitehall will be needed to facilitate this. So we have found, so I hope this is good news, but I'm not entirely clear what the good news is. I think it's really important that we understand exactly what this means. So at the minute, community and voluntary sector organisations who deliver the economic and activity work, which was threatened, as we know, a couple of years ago by the loss of ESF funding. It then got a partial reprieve through shared prosperity, which continued, I believe, in cash terms for a couple of years. But then there was a bit of a cut, about a 10 or 11% cut. Now we know that this was a very dramatic cut was being going to be forced on the sector, particularly because of the insistence of removing the resource component had to be the minority bit, i.e. it had to be dominated by capital rather than resource spending. I'm still not clear from the department what cash split they are expecting, and whether they are effectively, how much they're saying to the community and voluntary sector that the cash amount in resource will be for economic and activity next year. It doesn't. Not entirely clear from this letter unless I'm not reading it properly. But I'll bring in the Deputy Chair, Diane Forsyth.
Thank you, Chair. On this, I saw some commentary last week that from First Deputy First Minister that the Executive had written or took action on account of the Local Growth Fund. I was just wondering if we might be able to get sight of the correspondence on that, because it's usually just been going from the Finance Minister. I haven't saw what went or what exactly is going on behalf of the entire Executive.
There definitely was a report, I believe, that it said all the executive parties. I don't know if that meant that a representative minister from each party or representatives of all the parties, but yeah, I think that would be helpful to find out if the TO that can furnish us with that. I suppose the key thing here, but the kind of question we need an answer to is, and this letter just doesn't make it clear yet, telling me, it says, it has been decided that given MHCLG, I've read this out before, MHCLG delays, it has been decided that meaning the Executive.
I think that means the English Department. Chair, for me, the quandary is... the way that sentence reads is... who's controlling the resource, because it indicates there that the MHCLG delivery of the resource element remains in 26-27. Does that then mean the Executive is delivering the capital element? It's unclear as to how that splits, whether it's the same split, which is much higher for capital.
Sorry, you're right. You're right. Apologies, I missed it says despite the MHCLG delivery of the resource element of LGF in 26-27. I suppose if the Executive is saying they're going to take over all elements of the fund from April 27, are they accepting that there's going to be this fairly dramatic and brutal cut in this financial year because they haven't got the requested flexibility from the MHCLG, or are they still expecting more flexibility from MHCLG. I think that's worth asking urgently, like as in, like, you know, if the department's watching, we do need to know kind of now what's happening with this, particularly because the sector obviously have people on protective notice, and this is obviously now extremely urgent in terms of the provision of these projects, and in a sense, even if the executive is telling us or implying that in 27, 28 they are going to take it in-house and they're going to do it differently, i.e. increase the volume going to resource, so therefore they can spend more of the money on economic and activity. Does that mean that you have a year in which loads of people will be laid off and presumably will go and find other jobs, and it'll be difficult for all the different community and voluntary organisations to bring them back in? So I think we need to know urgently. One other final point before I bring in Brian is there is a question I think it's worth asking, which is whenever this went from being ESF to SPF, under ESF, the Department of Economy match funded European funds. Whenever it went to SPF, it froze in cash terms, but the executive didn't have to match fund anything that London put in. So I think we should ask the department, ask the finance department, and then we need to ask the economy, what happened to that amount of money? I think it was about 30 million. Was that sucked back into other executive pressures or other departmental pressures? But I do think there is an amount of money which was being spent by the executive, by the Department of Economy, on economic and activity to match fund this ESF money. Then it's gone over to London via the SPF. London has now changed the SPF to the Local Growth Fund, and is obviously doing it in a way which is not popular and not appropriate to hear. But we still have this question about the previous money that was being spent by the executive on this that is no longer being spent. Has that just been sucked into other executive pressures, or is it being used for something else? I think it would be helpful to find that out. Remember, Brian Kingston's going to.
Yeah, look, we've all, I'm sure, had some engagement with the groups, and like yourself, I've met with the Belfast Works Connect. So I hadn't seen this report before, which is in our table pack, so I'll get a proper read of that. I hadn't, just with that coming late in the day. The main problem is the pinch point of next year. I mean, this, which is going to be a 64% cut in the funding, in revenue funding for work through voluntary and community sectors. Certainly it's an issue we highlighted yesterday in our speech on the Audit Office report, how voluntary and community sector can be and is an effective partner in many government initiatives, and I think this is a good example. The reach that many voluntary community sector groups have in accessing people who are economically inactive, working with them and helping them to the point where they can move into employment, and they have a good track record in that work, working alongside statutory partners, but I think they have that extra reach and accessibility. So yeah, the main problem, I mean, it's welcome that they're talking there that the fund, the Local Growth Fund, will move under direction of the executive. I presume that's the Northern Ireland executive. Will manage all elements of the fund from April 27. But this coming year, April 26 to March 27, is the year where currently there is this 2/3 reduction. Staff are currently getting their redundancy notices. And a lot of expertise is going to be lost. Groups are going to contract their areas of working. Many of the Belfast groups have been working much further afield, counties Antrim and County Down, and bringing the benefit of that work. So I think we have to, given this letter that we have received, I mean, I think we should be writing back to the department, highlighting the pinch point that there is in this year. There is the potential for further funding, additional funding to become available, and this comes under executive control. I don't know if the Pride in Place funding will be relevant to this, whether it'll be more capital orientated. We'll come on to that, that's the next item.
Just on it, there's going to be a different operation here than in GB. In GB, that will be ring-fenced as part of Local Growth Fund, whereas it won't be part of the fund here, so effectively it won't need to be applied here. Once the executive has full control of the local growth fund, that pride in place element won't be a ring-fenced part of it. That will only apply in GB. So that kind of takes it out of the equation for 27 onwards.
Yeah. So and the green paper that was the name that slipped my mind. But the green paper about helping people into employment pathways to work, I think it was called. Again, that promised extra funding for employability support, tackling economic inactivity. So there is the potential for further funding to become available after this forthcoming financial year, but we need the help to sustain that important work through this coming financial year. So I think I would propose that we write highlighting this particular need next year and asking that our executive, aware of all the competing pressures, but do all they can to provide support to reduce the contraction of this work, which is currently going to happen. If they can find the means to sustain it, find some extra funding for the forthcoming financial year without having to make a long-term commitment, given that the local growth fund will be coming under the executive's control fully.
Sorry if I wasn't clear. I think that's what I had proposed, and I think the letter that we have is not clear. It isn't clear about does this mean any change in the cash resource amount that will be available to the sector here to spend on economic inactivity, and or are they still waiting on clarity? So yes, and I agree. If they aren't, then they need to be explicit about that, because the consequence is that all the people on protective notice, you've already talked about people going to other areas to work from Belfast, all the people on protective notice will leave and go and do other things, because they've been going to be, well, the people who are protective notice will possibly go and do entirely different jobs in entirely different places. So there is a real risk here that we lose a lot of this for the sake of a single year, particularly given the executive was spending a significant amount on economic inactivity, which it may not be now post ESF. So I think that's why we need to ask that question, and ideally get an answer. Well, not ideally, get an answer by next week, because it isn't clear from this, I'm afraid. And I think it's worth, if members are content, us, if they haven't, they may be watching, but if they haven't, to flagging this response to NIHF and to say that we are getting greater clarity from the department on this. Members are content? Okay. Right. So the next item is relates to that, and it's in relation to pride in place, which we just discussed. It's at page 80 of the tabled pack. At the meeting on the 14th of January, the committee considered a reply from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury regarding the Local Growth Fund, noting the Chief Secretary's assertion that following the recent Pride in Place announcement in England, Scotland and Wales, corresponding funding will be allocated in Northern Ireland and will be able to be used more flexibly. End quote. The committee wrote to the Department to ask for more information on this and corresponding funding from Northern Ireland. This was the letter we talked about a couple of weeks ago. The Department has now provided some background to this initiative, highlighting that dairy and Coleraine were included in phase 1 of Pride in Place, which will continue to be directly delivered by MHCLG. The funding for these programmes will not be taken from the Local Growth Fund allocation. NIO is leading the development of a Local Growth Fund investment plan in partnership with DOF and MHCLG. DOF are coordinating cross-departmental input via the Funding Policy Interdepartmental Working Group. The department also highlight that Pride in Place Phase 2 was announced at the end of 2025 in England, Scotland and Wales. This will be funded from their Local Growth Fund allocations. Phase 2 will not operate here, meaning there is no corresponding deduction from the overall 45.5 million per annum Local Growth Fund allocation here. So members, this is, the flexibility is effectively, you can do what you like with the Pride in Place announcement as of next year, as of 27, or is it, does it say?
It's actually, again, not entirely clear. They've talked about the announcement at the end of 2025, but that would have been, one would assume, for the 26-27 year. So my assumption that it's 27 onwards as per the reversion of the Local Growth Fund to the executive. But we'll seek clarity on that, Chair, but that's the assumption that I've made from what's been said.
Is there any sense that that there is an amount of pride in place here which is being sucked into just random other pressures, or do we know?
No. This was specifically ring-fenced because the funding was coming from Westminster.
And
the applications were direct. Members will recall.
Yes, of course.
Kind of
yes.
Lot of correspondence around the fact that the applications are being directly made to Westminster rather than any kind of reference to programme for government or the executive or anything like that here.
Okay. Anyone wish to come in on that? We will. I think we do need to get more information again from the department on. So it says that the flexibility that is being offered is so the flexibility being offered, but at the same time NIO is leading the development of local growth fund investment plan. So it's unclear who is actually owning this. Did the NIO own it? But they're going to deliver it in conjunction with the vault departments, and they'll have a bit more input than they previously, or what exactly? I think we need more clarity over it. So it's a slight change in how year one of Pride in Place went, but it's still not entirely clear who owns it. Is it owned by the executive, or is it owned by the UK government with a little bit more structured input from the executive? Brian Kingston.
2 points. First of all, if we can get clarity, is it capital or is it totally flexible? Can it be used for revenue? Reading it, it sounds more like capital funding, but if we can get clarity on that, can it be used for revenue? And the other point is, don't want to be overly pedantic, but one of the fourth point up there talks about the funding in England, Scotland and Wales, and then phase 2 will not operate in the north. I don't know if that's the north of England. If that means Northern Ireland, I think it should say Northern Ireland, just so we're clear where we're talking about.
Okay, I mean, fairly clear it relates to Northern Ireland, but that's...
Yeah, if when we're getting official papers, it should state the name of the country.
Fair enough, mate. You're happy for you to make that point, Brian, but I think it's fairly clear in the context of where it's referring to. But in any case, okay, so if members are content then on that, we'll get the clarity we've sought. I think it's fairly clear this relates to the north of Ireland, i.e. Northern Ireland, but on the broader specific delivery points we talked about, I think we do need clarity on who owns the fund, what precisely does flexibility mean. Okay, 5.9 relates to the Committee for Education Scrutiny of Draft Multi-Year Budget for 26, for financial year 26-27 to 29-30. So members, that's at page 81 of the tabled pack. As members will recall, the committee wrote to all other statutory committees and the Assembly Audit Committee regarding the draft multi-year budget. The Assembly Audit Committee regarding the draft multi-year budget. The Education Committee has confirmed that it is unable to come to a collective view on the draft budget, and as a consequence, each party will be responding individually on the matter. This is to note, it will be added to the committee's evidence base for the scrutiny of the draft multi-year budget. Now, I think it's important just to say we're now in a slightly unusual situation where we are really kind of unable to perform. We're scrutinising a draft budget, which is still a draft budget, and where committees are telling us, possibly for kind of understandable political reasons, because there isn't political agreement at the executive on the draft multi-year budget, that they can't come to an agreement on it. However, I do think as a committee we're going to have to start taking evidence on this fairly soon.
We have those programmes in, sure.
And when we do, I think we'll need to be clear that we are talking about a document which is not agreed, but there is clear agreement that the creation of a multi-year budget is something that is hugely important, and there was, I think, relative political consensus on the desirability of a multi-year budget, even if there's disagreement over this multi-year budget. I think it's very important that we, particularly given other committees are talking with them, we've asked them for their views. We'll just bring the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And just to declare, I work as APS to the Education Minister. I think that it's important to note that the difference that we have in Finance Committee with others when looking at the multi-year budget is the Department of Finance's own officials came in and presented their multi-year Department of Finance budget to us, and then the Finance Minister took that and put that into his draft multi-year budget proposals for all departments. where I can understand that the Committee for Education won't have been able to scrutinise that with their officials, because presumably the Department of Education officials prepared something similar for the Department of Education, which is not what has been adopted by the Finance Minister in the overall multi-year budget package. So whilst ours sat quite tidily within that, I can see that perhaps that's left it difficult across other departments, because the officials will have prepared something that isn't necessarily what's been picked up by the consolidated draft proposals lifted by the Finance Minister. So somehow that obviously needs to be built in, but I just wanted to note that that's obviously where it clearly differs to us as we scrutinise the departmental budget as well as the consolidated multi-year budget here.
On the it was clear that there isn't political agreement. There is the draft budget is a draft proposal by the Finance Minister at this stage, which obviously doesn't have executive agreement. Nevertheless, it has been published and it's being discussed in the public. So obviously it is a proposal in front of the executive. I don't know what status it has in terms of executive discussions, but I think we as a committee have an obligation to scrutinise it and show the public that we're doing that scrutiny, which obviously we will be. In relation to the Education Department, they have published today a document which is called the 5-year Education Budget Strategy for consultation. Now, I think it would be helpful for us to understand this is not a document that obviously has any, they're not obliged in statute, I believe, to consult on their quote-unquote budget strategy. I think it would be helpful to us for us to understand as a committee what the purpose of this document is, and find out from perhaps other committees whether, or indeed other, maybe we don't need to go to concession committees, whether other similar documents are expected to be produced. I would just say, sort of in parenthesis, it's perhaps it feels like at the minute a slightly disordered budget process where we have a draft budget which hasn't been agreed, but a budget strategy from a different department, which is perhaps, shall we say, not 100% simpatico with the draft budget document. And one might say that these conversations are ones that should be had round discussion tables and in ministerial offices rather than on websites. But we can ask that question.
Chair,
Clark.
it might just be useful to get clarity. Members will recall fairly lengthy discussion over a period of time with the department on the 5-year business plans that the departments were going to produce with indicative budget attached. It might just be useful to get clarity if this is the education version. They were all generally scheduled for publication in the autumn. That didn't happen, but I do wonder if that's what this ultimately is that 5-year business plan.
Yes, I think that would be helpful. I think that would be really helpful. Yeah, I think that would be helpful, and if other departments are planning to publish their own, and a sense from the Department of Finance what its view on this, and if it links with what they've. Okay, members are content. Now we'll then move on to agenda item 6, which is the Fiscal Council Bill. And we have an oral briefing. With the Audit Office. Hello.
Hi there.
Welcome. So members, at page 53 of the meeting pack, 59, excuse me, of the meeting pack, there's a clerk's memo with an oral briefing from the Audit Office. We also have the Audit Office response to the call for views in the bill, which was dated 16th of January. That's at page 62 of the pack. So welcome Drinnia Carville, who is obviously a Comptroller and Auditor General, is normally in front of the PAC, but we're very happy to have her in front of the Finance Committee today, along with Rodney, who's also a frequent visitor to the PAC, but we're also happy to have him. Drinnia's a Comptroller and Auditor General, obviously, and Rodney's Chief Operating Officer at the Audit Office. So Drinnia, if you could give us an opening statement, and as always, members, indicate should you wish to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for both seeking our views on this.
Interrupt you very quickly, Drinnia, just to say, members, Hansard will obviously record this briefing if everybody's content with that. Content. Thank you. Sorry, over to you, Journey.
No, thank you, and thank you for the invitation here today. As the Chair said, I have provided written correspondence to the committee which really focused on myself and my office taking on audit responsibilities for the Fiscal Council, and I would like to thank the committee for writing to me to advise of this legislation being enacted. You'll note from that correspondence I also took the opportunity to make some observations in respect of the independence of the Fiscal Council, and I did so given that I myself am an independent office holder, and whilst the levels of independence are somewhat different, I feel I can offer some observations just based on my own experiences, and also to touch on potential duplication or overlap with the work of the Northern Ireland Audit Office, and again purely observations for your consideration. I probably would stress at the outset there's nothing here is insurmountable, and I do welcome the early consideration and the foresight of the committee. So I will expand on those three areas, if I may, Chair. In terms of the audit, responsibility for the financial audit of the Fiscal Council is relatively straightforward, and really good to have oversight of that. We will obviously have resource implications for ourselves, but we can factor those into our forward planning as soon as we've confirmation when that would take effect. I did also point out in my written correspondence that coming under my remit for audit will bring the Fiscal Council then under my consideration for my public reporting work. And I touched on that for two reasons. One, just to highlight to the committee, you will be aware that under my legislation, I am totally independent in choosing what I report upon in my public reporting work, being guided by statute to consider economy, efficiency and effectiveness of the use of resources, and therefore that may then include the Fiscal Council in due course. I also then wanted just to highlight, I noticed in Schedule 1 to the draft bill, it requires the Council to appoint a suitable person to carry out an annual review of performance of the Council's functions. Now, I don't read that as relating to myself under that statutory remit that I have. In terms of independence then, again, I have pointed out in my view the importance of independence and freedom from influence as I see it with regard to the work of the Fiscal Council. And it's clear, I think, from the draft legislation that the Council is intended to carry out its functions with impartiality and objectivity, and that can become more difficult when a body is under the control of a department for budget setting purposes, for example, as especially in times of budget constraints there can be a limitation into how the functions can be performed. I would observe then that the wording and the language in the draft bill and the underlying schedules are a little bit at odds with one another. There's clear desires for impartiality and objectivity in the draft bill, whereas the schedules use the language of control, direct and approval in relation to the department. And then lastly, I do wish to touch on what is probably the key point for me, and that is avoiding any unnecessary duplication or overlap with the work of my office, and I'm aware that the committee has been considering such. In relation to the role of the CNAG, the Audit Northern Ireland Order 87 determines that the CNAG may carry out examinations into economy, efficiency and effectiveness with which a public body has used its resources, whereas the Fiscal Council Bill as currently drafted is a duty to examine and report on public finances with particular specified reporting. And I think as currently written, certainly my reading is there is the potential for some overlap or some duplication in scrutiny. Certainly when I am formulating and determining my own public reporting programme, I'm very cognizant of what other regulators may be working on, as I believe it's important as far as practically possible and respecting the statutory remits of others not to duplicate, because to do so would put unnecessary burden on public resources. And I must say, to this end, I have had a very good, very open and constructive working relationship with Sir Robert and the staff and other members of the Council to date in this regard. However, I would point out my work and the work of the Audit Office by its nature is very backward looking. We report on how public money has been spent, and my legislation specifically does not permit me to question the policy objectives where I am undertaking any examination. I note that the legislation in respect of the OBR is a little more specific than that currently drafted for the Fiscal Council, referencing the sustainability of public finances. And I mention that because I interpret that certainly to be a little more focused and forward-looking, perhaps. It also provides quite a clear distinction and more of a direction into the policy space than would currently be within my remit. And I guess, I mention it because such a distinction can in fact allow our work to be complementary rather than duplicating. And, we have seen an example of where this has worked particularly well to date, and you will be aware that we both have reported on financing water infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I reported insofar as my statutory authority permitted me to do so, not questioning any of the policy objectives currently or in the future. And then the Fiscal Council also reported referencing our work, but taking their work more into the future and into potential policy options for policymakers to consider. So during those two pieces of work that we were doing, the teams at the Audit Office and the Fiscal Council worked very well together, advising, informing on our respective studies without duplicating or encroaching on our statutory remits. So I'll stop there, Chair, and take any questions, and happy to go into any more detail in any of that.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you very much, Drinnia, and your organisation has come up a lot of time in scrutiny, because obviously we've been trying to think about the comparator organisations and also reporting lines and all of that. You mentioned that in the schedules it was a bit more, there's a bit of sort of slight disjoint between what's in the schedules and what's in the main clauses of the bill. The clause of the bill, you can describe it as an independent body, and the schedules are a bit more directive in terms of giving the department a route in to direct, and obviously they have responsibility for effectively all the terms T's and C's, and that's different to the way the Audit Office is. And you're a different type of, because you're a body corporate and you're totally independent, whereas I don't know if you're able to shed a bit of light on how on why. You're not saying it's a concern, but you're noting it. Why are you noting it, I suppose is my question. Why do you think it's something for us to note?
I think it is, I suppose, where, and I said at the outset, as you recognise, I am a different type of independent, and I certainly, in terms of my own budget, because I do still have to seek a budget for my office, and the Assembly's Audit Committee is the body that scrutinises and ultimately puts forward my budget to the House. So I have that little bit of increased independence. I guess my own experience when the Assembly was down, where the departments had more of a direct input into my budget, and I certainly raised concerns at that time as to how a department directing, and potentially for reasons that I understood, we were in a time of fiscal concern, but potentially then by way of the budget that was going to be awarded to me or granted to me, might have impacted on how much work I could do as an organisation. So there are, I guess, indirect consequences, and certainly something to just be aware of. I think there are other regulators who would be in a similar space who have independence of decision making, independence of reporting, but have a budget line through a department.
And is it simply the case that if you are if you're seeking a budget, it's not necessarily that people are going out of their way to actively compromise your independence? It's a behavioural thing. I mean, tell me if I'm presenting this wrongly. is it a behavioural thing in that if you have to seek a budget from somebody, but at the same time you also have to sometimes scathingly criticise that person, not necessarily that individual, but the organisation, or robustly hold them to account in a way that is uncomfortable. There's a challenge there. There's just a kind of slight behavioural thing that.
Absolutely, and perceptions as well around that, yes. Perceptions of bias, and I think probably a difficult conundrum for both parties in some respects.
Yes. Okay. In relation to the point you made about forward and backward-looking responsibilities, that was quite striking because as an audit function is if looking at spending that has, as you say, that has happened. A fiscal watchdog is about explicating challenges that are to come or that are current. Is there any way that you think that the bill could be improved to delineate that more carefully?
I guess that's why I draw attention to, it is only one word, but that sustainability of public finances that sits in the OBR legislation. And again, when we get into really pursuing language like this, it is only interpretation. But for me, that does have a sense of future around that. I guess that's why I highlight that. I think it does have a bit of a distinction and a direction, and probably does, as I said, push more into considering things at that policy level, where certainly my remit does not pertain me to do so.
And is it that, so sustainability is a word, that word is in our bill too, is it that you want it more? You want to say, not saying you want anything, you're just giving us a view, but do you think there should be more emphasis on the word sustainability then in the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council bill, or could be?
I certainly think there could be.
Okay.
I caveat all of this by I shouldn't be determining any policy.
I know you're not, and I understand that.
But I certainly think it could be.
Okay, I'm going to bring in other members now. First, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Rena and Rodney for joining committee. Sorry I can't be there in person today. And thanks very much for your evidence around this. And with myself sitting on Finance Committee, PAC Audit Committee, I kind of see these dynamics of yourselves and how you operate as independent but reporting through different aspects of the Assembly. And whilst we can see that, it's important to have it in place, you do see what the bureaucracy and that dynamic means. So I think that whenever we're reading into this, I think that we're going to just be having to place a lot of trust in the status of the Fiscal Council, just shining through, because these things do need to be legislated for and where they sit. But the language is important. I wanted to speak around the potential for duplication and just building on what Matthew had said there. It's I was just wondering, in terms of the work, in terms of if things were happening simultaneously, like I wouldn't, you said very strongly, your office and the independence is so important, and sometimes that independence and the importance of it is keeping what you're doing confidential. So if you're working on something for a particular reason, be it a whistleblowing or something that's going to, expose quite a big detailed thing, I think that it's really, really important to be able to protect that. But in terms of the potential for simultaneous work going on, do you think there needs to be some sort of safeguard there, or what do you think would be appropriate?
So I suppose I have worked with the Fiscal Council to date, because we both, the timetables around that piece on water infrastructure, for example, did overlap somewhat. By the time I was coming towards the end of my piece of work, the Fiscal Council was starting theirs. With other public bodies such as the Fiscal Council, such as other regulators who may be in the same space, we do operate with respecting each other's statutory remit, but we will talk to each other on a confidential basis. We will share information as far and respect the confidentiality of that. We'll never breach GDPR or anything like that. So if you mentioned whistleblowing, that's something that I couldn't confidentially share with anyone else. But when we're in the space of what our work is doing, what it's finding, there's a trust and a mutual respect to allow us to share to a point. Now, what we have got in place, and I think I said in my written correspondence, we have a memorandum of understanding, for example, with the Public Services Ombudsman and the Northern Ireland Audit Office, because our work it can, again, have the potential to overlap, and certainly I would be keen that we could get something similar in place with the Fiscal Council in that regard as well. And I guess to date, things have worked very well. I have no reason to think they wouldn't, but it would provide a formality and I guess an assurance if we were to put something more formal in place in due course. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you. And around that with the Memorandum of Understanding, and again, my concern is that this is, whilst independent, still off the department to a degree. It's not, really a standalone as NIPSO, as you say, and again, the importance of the standalone independence of yourselves in the audit office. And I would just be cautious about putting things in Fiscal Council legislation with requirements of the Memorandum of Understanding that might in any way compromise the position of your organisation. So I just wondered, when you talk about that and getting that in place, would it be more likely to be quite, quite slight to a degree, because I just would be really concerned about over committing that? And as well, if you were developing something like a Memorandum of Understanding, do you think it's something that could be drafted and brought forward in advance of or alongside this legislation to see how it would fit?
Our current memorandums of understanding, they wouldn't be enshrined in legislation at all. They are more of a working agreement between the organisations, and certainly that is the status that I was envisaging, certainly. Again, subject to review, subject to change as well, but I wasn't envisaging it sitting either enshrined in legislation or being presented alongside legislation.
That's what I think is quite important here, because I know there's been a bit of back and forth on it, and it's my view that it shouldn't be brought into the legislation, because it would compromise yourselves and just that entire working relationship around the things. I just wanted to ask as well, in terms of reporting lines, do you think in the bill there should be a little bit more clarity around reporting lines to the Assembly, or what was your view on that? I know you obviously looked at it and thought about it in terms of how you sit yourselves in that, but just would be interested in your view.
I certainly think, sorry, maybe I haven't picked up on that particularly, but I certainly think that the Council should have a direct reporting line. Again, it sort of sits alongside independence, but I think the practice to date has been a publication, a right of publication, and a reporting line directly, rather than through the department. Yeah.
To come in, just Chair, we didn't, Diane, comment on that specifically in the written documentation we gave to you. We did note that, and certainly we would advocate the direct line into the Assembly rather than reporting to the department. Again, it's back to the aspect of independence. And just if I may circle back a little bit, your line of questioning is really interesting. I'm circling and writing some of the points that you're making, because it absolutely appeals to me in terms of Drina as a corporation sole ultimately, so we must protect the independence of the Auditor General, absolutely critical. And in fact, the reputation arguably could stand or fall on that point in particular. But that said, we are great advocates in our organisation, and some of you will have seen our work breaking down silos and the benefit of collaborative working, and indeed we've been very much behind the push for partnership working, and in so doing we have to find our own comfortable space where we can do that with our own regulators in a trusting, supportive environment, because these can be very lonely positions too for regulators when they're using their authoritative voices. So there are a lot of practicalities around that, which you have to be careful how you nuance that in paper anywhere.
Absolutely, and obviously with yourselves, you're there and supporting fantastically the work of the PAC on a regular basis. But it's very clear that you're available to go to other committees, obviously with us today, and where you've different reports coming through. And just with the way that this is sitting in the status of the Fiscal Council at the minute, it feels to me like, because it's sort of off Department of Finance, it kind of feels like we're missing something by not having a few lines in there around, just reporting to the Assembly a little bit broader. It's like as if it's always just going to come back to this piece. So that was kind of where I was coming from in that view, because I think with the Audit Office adding value, you're adding it right across all the committees, all the departments, and I think the Fiscal Council also will be, but it's just making sure that those reporting lines are clear within that. So thank you, that's me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance today. I've been looking forward to this meeting because to understand the difference and, as you say, the potential overlap between the Audit Office and the Fiscal Council. As a generality, is it fair to say the Audit Office is looking backwards and the Fiscal Council is to look forward as a generality?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That's my reading of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to recognise the Audit Office. You don't just look at the figures; you're looking at the outcomes, the value of work, and some of your. I mean, we had the debate yesterday on your helpful report on the civil service, following up your previous one, and your reports on homelessness and so on, issues in society. So, I think that's very valuable. So we're told that there are fiscal councils elsewhere, and that's been part of the argument for it. Are there equivalents of the Audit Office elsewhere, and are they called something else elsewhere? So that's my first question.
Okay. Yes, so we have, and we actually do liaise quite a lot with we call our sister audit agencies, we quite often say. So you have the National Audit Office, which is in England, then you have Audit Scotland, and then you have the Welsh Audit Office and the Office of the Controller and Auditor General in the South as well. So the respective CNAGs and all of the organisations liaise quite heavily. You then have audit offices throughout Europe and across the world as well, and again there's lots of linkages between them all. Everyone's statutory remit is, I would say, to put it mild, the same but different, and very much tied into the makeup of the respective governments that they serve. So even when we look at UK and Ireland, we all have a slightly different remit, but then everyone has a slightly different government as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the coexistence of the two bodies is established elsewhere. Paragraph 4.5 of the bill, it says in each year the Council may prepare an overall report or a thematic report. I'm just wondering in what ways would it be, again, that's where I see the potential for overlap with the function of the Audit Office, as I mentioned, some of the thematic reports you've produced. So I don't know if you have any view on that, on in what way would it be producing thematic reports, which wouldn't end up being a backward looking, at how money has been spent.
I think, without, speaking on behalf of the Council, I can really only look to what has gone before, and certainly I think when they were looking at water infrastructure, and that, was a thematic report of such, because it was looking at the infrastructure, the impact that has on lots of areas, social housing, etc. I do know that the Council has then actually looked at other areas of public spending. this is the area where there is the potential for overlap, but again, I suppose I come back to date, and I have no reason to believe it wouldn't happen going forward, that we would liaise with each other. And whilst the remits, there's the potential for overlap, they are different because I can only take my work so far. I do think when you look at the Fiscal Council's work, water is the prime example. Yes, they do look back to set the scene, I guess, to demonstrate, you know, what has gone before, but they take that forward. Similarly, there is a little bit of, whilst I agree with the generality at the outset that we are by its nature looking back, we do look forward in our recommendations, and we do make recommendations to try and improve public services going forward. So there's a little bit of that forward looking, but the big difference for me is the statutory remit that I have that says do not question the policy objectives, because and then that's sometimes where I have I have to be careful in the work that I do, that I don't go outside my statutory remit. But that's where I think there is the potential for the Fiscal Council to go that bit further. And I think I said in my opening comments, there is opportunity here as well for our work to be complementary. And I meet with other regulators, including the Fiscal Council. We do sometimes talk about and look for opportunity. We might do a joint piece of work in the future, which, you know, things like that we do talk about. It hasn't presented itself certainly in my tenure to date, but I think that's somewhere where if we can add value, pool resources, something that there's opportunity for as well. So I don't want to be all negative.
I don't doubt there's no shortage of topics needing attention, but it's just so that we don't have duplication, you know, and that I'm sure there would be close working. Okay, just last comment, Chair. I note what you say there about wording with the approval of the department in a couple of paragraphs, although those are relating to the setting of salaries, you know, and terms and conditions. So hopefully that is just normal good practice in terms of there's some constraint, you know, but certainly if I'm sure the Fiscal Council, even through this committee, would make views known if it felt there was undue restriction on its activities from the department. Okay, thank you, Chair.
I think still some question about whether that's normal or best practice. I think that's one of our questions as to whether it is. Just on that, I presume, would you take a view as to whether the setting of things like terms and conditions is a potential constraint? Part of what we're asking is obviously not necessarily in relation to now, because when you draft legislation, you're not just looking at, well, it's sort of working grand now, so we'll just, because the current finance minister and his predecessor, two predecessors in fairness, were pretty, they'd set the Fiscal Council up, they had pretty good, and because the current chair of the Fiscal Council has a relatively good relationship, that you legislate for kind of, everything's grand now, so we'll just sort of legislate for it to continue being grand, not knowing that you could find a situation in which you had some other future minister from a different party or the same party who was, you know, or there was a particular issue that was very pressurised for the executive that was creating a lot of tension, and there was perhaps a chair of the Fiscal Council from a different background to Sir Robert Choate, who's pretty experienced at these things. Do you think there's any potential constraints or downsides in having that the department having the power to set T's and C's?
I suppose to answer that, Matthew, I may start probably with the arrangements that apply to our office. So we are a relatively small office, but of course we're significantly larger than the likes of the Fiscal Council. So we're around about 140 members of staff. So when we get into the space of terms and conditions of those members of staff, we don't align them. We're totally independent, and we have the autonomy, is probably the right word, to provide and agree our own terms and conditions for staff. It's not aligned to civil service, and but we have statute which requires us to be cognizant effectively of what the Northern Ireland Civil Service pay and indeed what the National Audit Office pay, and that's quite old statute, and ultimately it's at the CNAG's discretion as to what those T's and C's might be. That said, we have our own internal governance arrangements, we have our own board, we have a remuneration committee, so it's all wrapped around the whole process. Hopefully that's not too long-winded, but there's a real value in that, because our first corporate priority is the provision of high quality public audit. and that's a reasonable expectation, we believe, of this Assembly and others. In so doing, we have to make sure we've got the right T's and C's to both attract, recruit and indeed retain.
It's fair to say that
people.
Whenever you go to the audit committee, and therefore and technically, because we all vote, there is a vote on your budget overall, not a vote in every single individual salaries and T's and C's, but there is a vote, and that goes to the audit committee, and effectively you are seeking a budget from, you might call it one of your main customers, i.e. legislators and scrutinisers of public spending, of this, which this committee is obviously one, and PAC is your primary customer, but the Assembly writ large. Whereas the Fiscal Council will be going to agree its T's and C's with effectively the department, who it is primarily scrutinising. It's a bit of a different situation, isn't it? Slightly trickier.
It is, and that was my angle on it, to demonstrate to the committee the strength that we attach to the arrangements that we have, without necessarily answering directly your question as to what would be appropriate for the Fiscal Council, because it's not really for me. But I
get that, but you're talking about some of the. So there's also the from your, like you kind of mentioned, Dorina, the situation in which when there wasn't an executive, you kind of have, and that wasn't necessarily because of a political consideration, an accounting officer saying, well, I employ auditors and trained accountants, and presumably you will have the odd generalist too, certainly people who work in things like communications, and my person's on that, or I've got that number of people doing that, why do you need that? And that is inherently an uncomfortable conversation for a regulator.
Yeah, so certainly for the Fiscal Council, I would have thought it's an expectation of everyone who's an interest in that body being successful, that you would want them to have the right T's and C's for the quality of staff that they need, and the people that have the right skills. I don't have any evidence to suggest that civil service terms and conditions wouldn't provide that. Yeah, they may not.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, the one thing I suppose I would add, and certainly we did a piece of work on skills and the skills for Northern Ireland's economy, and certainly something that we have published. But in carrying out that report, we certainly, it was reported to us that in areas where there are particular skill sets required, that there can be difficulty attracting and retaining currently. And I raise that, again, it's not for me to say whether in this particular instance, but it might be one to seek further evidence as to whether the skill sets that would be required are in particular short supply, and whether there are competitive salaries, etc.
That's a particular challenge if you're recruiting people with financial expertise. In this case, it'll probably be, for the Fiscal Council, more likely to be economists. I don't know if the NIHF employs economists. Are there economists?
No, we don't directly, no.
But you do employ trained auditors, accountants, who are you're in the competitive marketplace with people who can, private sector salaries. So that has to be okay. I think that's been helpful from it.
Go ahead.
If you want to come in on that,
just very quickly, just back to Brian's point, because actually it's very important that in so doing, what we do is we benchmark with all of those other folks who provide the same service. Audit Scotland, Audit Wales, National Audit Office, Office of Controller, Auditor General in the South. We benchmark, so I guess there's a role there that something similar could be done with the Fiscal Council. How do they find it in other jurisdictions in other countries, and how do they agree T's and C's?
So can I just ask on that, Chair? So effectively, do you have a budget to work within, and then you have a reasonable discretion, and who ultimately, as a public body, are you accountable to?
Us.
Through the Assembly's Audit Committee, we see
the Public Accounts Committee.
So I report to the Public Account. I bring my work to the Public Accounts Committee, but in terms of the oversight of I am the accounting officer of the organisation, the same way a permanent secretary would be the accounting officer for the department. So I am the accounting officer, and then I seek a budget from the Northern Ireland Assembly Audit Committee, and that committee then oversee my use of those resources and the governance arrangements around those. So I report through that committee to the House. So there is that oversight, whilst there is a level of autonomy granted to me as a corporation sole. I do have a reporting mechanism back in and have the governance requirements that anyone else would have. So, and you know, in terms of spending that resource, I align to all the requirements of managing public money, everything that any accounting officer is required to live within.
So Gemma and Diane would see us at that committee.
I know. We have to explain ourselves to Gemma and Diane.
Okay. Diane, want to come in again briefly, Deputy Chair?
Yeah, thank you. And that's what I was sort of saying in my questions. I just, I sit on all those committees, so I see all the different, strands of the governance of the way the Audit Office is coming through. So this is why I'm trying to think of the way the Fiscal Council will come through. But I just wanted to pick up on the point Matthew was making around, you were talking about, the skills and getting people employed within the Fiscal Council. And I think it came up before in a couple of our sessions about how if you were recruiting a specific job in an arm's length body, you seem to be more likely to actually fill it than if you were in general civil service recruiting for the likes of an economist, because people know exactly where they are and what they'll be doing. So potentially, if people see a job advertised for the Fiscal Council, you might be more inclined to get someone to come and sit in that arm's length body. I don't know if that would be, your view. And just on that, perhaps slightly stretched, but just when you're here, I was wondering if you had any update on sort of the review of arm's length bodies. It's something that's sort of been lingering on with ours, and we keep getting referred to yourselves there, Doreen.
You getting a wee follow up in there? Yep. Well, Trina and Rodney can take both of those.
We probably couldn't provide any evidence to support the first part, your first point, Diane, in terms of the anecdote as to whether it's more attractive arm's length body or departments, and it's probably multifaceted in that different arm's length bodies will have different pay and conditions, and I guess we're getting into why someone sees something as an attractive role and someone doesn't. So I couldn't offer you any evidence to support that.
I guess the panacea is that they actually see the vision and the mission of the organisation and what they're passionate about, what that organisation wants to do, and indeed that it aligns with their own values, the corporate values of the organisation. So I think anything that I'd be offering down would be a bit speculative, but I could probably talk about it for long enough, to be absolutely frank with you. Review of ALBs, I have nothing. We're doing our own piece of work on ALBs, but I have no current update on where we are on department's review of ALBs.
No, we are seeking update ourselves to tie into the piece of work that we're doing, which isn't a review of ALBs, but it's looking more at how arm's length bodies are working with their departments and the relationships and how much partnership, lack of silo, collaboration, how that's working.
We hope to publish that piece towards the end of March. So it'd be in a better position to give you an answer at that stage, because it's very much a work in progress, but we will follow up on there were a number of recommendations, of which that was one at a point in time.
Is that to the PAC, or is that just a more general bit of work?
So we will publish it hopefully at the end of March, and then PAC have primacy, so they have first call, I guess, as to whether they wish to take that forward.
That's our perennial things. We have our sibling, also chaired by a red-haired SDLP politician with a beard. But anyway, I can decide which is we're not related. Anyway, Dr. Aiken, we're going to come in.
Yeah, two things. First of all, three things. First of all, an apology. Sorry for not being here for the beginning of your evidence, and I apologise to the committee. This is one I particularly wanted to do, and the questions I'm going to ask, I'm not going to ask because it wouldn't be fair, because I wasn't here for the whole session. The second one is an observation, Doreen and Rodney. You have a degree of excellence that is perceived across Northern Ireland, the ability to forensically look into things and actually bring out sort of real lessons identified. One of the concerns that's been expressed to me is that your independence is likely, anybody who's trying to attack your independence, particularly in trying to reduce your budget or reduce your people or sort of undue influence and the rest of it. I just want a sort of a perspective on how you defend that independence, because that's something I think every elected representative and anybody who believes in good governance in Northern Ireland needs to see that you do that. And that's just like a view on that. And the second one is this view about sort of skills and people that you have. I would think that if we were looking across the whole piece, you'd be knocked down with people trying to get into your organisation because of the reputation it has. And also, it's just part of the sort of, do you have any sort of training scheme or something like that can open up? Because the other one is that I know from other jurisdictions, because of the reputations that your organisations have, is that people are actively poached out of there for being particularly good. So just in a view on that, if we have some kind of look at training. But those are just two perspectives. And again, I apologise to everybody in the committee and you for not being here for the beginning of it. But my lunch was very nice, by the way, just in case.
Good. Maybe start with the whole skills piece and even and pass to Rodney, because he'll be even closer to it than myself. But I appreciate your comments, first of all, and thank you for recognising the work of the office.
And I think it's worth saying. I mean, the one thing that scares the living daylights out of most other organisations in Northern Ireland is you.
It's when they hear the audit office
that is not a bad thing, trust me.
I became CNIG about 3.5 years ago, and I have to say at that time we weren't in the position of we were really struggling to recruit.
Yeah.
Now that was quite indicative of where the marketplace was in Northern Ireland generally, right. And also there was a real requirement for accountancy skills. Post-COVID world, I often said at that time, I don't know where accountants went during COVID, but they seemed to disappear. So when I came into the organisation, we weren't in that position. We have put a lot of work in, and Diane and Jem will know this because they've had to hear it about it. We've put a lot of work in that time around making sure that our offering is attractive, making sure that we are known to young people, and not just to young people. I don't want to be ageist, but we do have our internal training programs. We have diversified hugely over years. We run our own higher level apprenticeship scheme, working with the colleges, and we've been trying to expand that out across all of the regions. The offering there, we bring in graduate trainees. I worked in the audit office many years ago, and we typically would have been fortunate enough to benefit from bigger firms training people and then them coming to us post-qualification. Yep. The big firms aren't training in the same way and in the same numbers as they were previously, so that also depleted our market. So we've done a lot of work on our brand, on getting out there, on getting our corporate message out, trying to tap into the attractiveness to come and work with us. We're really fortunate now that we have turned that around in quite a short space of time, really, with the assistance of the audit committee, because they did have to take a bit of a chance with me and grant me a budget to allow me to go out and recruit, even though they were asking the question, your staff numbers aren't what you promised, Dorina, but I sort of said, stick with me, I'll get them there, and we've been very fortunate that we have done that. So that's where we are with skills. I hope we are an attractive employer, and it's certainly, I don't know what you want to expand on any of the other offerings. We're also a very successful training provider, and that's the other thing I would say. We our exam pass rate, etc., and the support and the provision that we provide is very attractive as well. And I guess for me the USP is, and one of the things I'll say to guys when they come into the organisation, and there's a lot of work being done with Gen Z in particular around about the impact that they want to make as an accountant. The audit office does offer something very difficult. You can make an impact on public services, and I think for most of us that's what makes us skip into work in the mornings. But if you want to add on
I'll add very quickly on the skills, and we'll circle back to the independence, Stephen, and I too thank you for the comments. It is nice, and it's for our staff more than us, to be absolutely frank with you, but really proud of our trainees. Around about 20% of our organisation are trainees, higher level apprentices and graduate trainee accountants, and really proud of the folks that come through both streams and how they develop and where they take their careers to, and preferably with us in the longer term as we train them in public audit. So there's not much I can add to what Dorina has said. It is a challenge. We want to be an employer of choice. We want to be seen to be somewhere where you would want to work, but you have to constantly work at that in an ever-changing marketplace, and you must be diverse, and you must have a strong offering, and we have been very grateful to the Assembly's Audit Committee for supporting us, because we were considered as a small budget. Our budget's less than £15 million every year, but we were significantly underspending, and we had vacancies. So trying to square that circle of we've got vacancies, but we still got to deliver a considerable workload. All of that financial audit work, all good practice stuff, and the heavy duty products that come to the Assembly. So all of that has been in play, and we are very grateful to the support of members to help us provide the platform that we now have. It's not that we won't have a degree of attrition in the organisation. We will have, and we need to have. It's very important for any organisation to stay fresh and current, and for people, and to respect people who move on, and to give other talent the opportunity then to breathe. But we have many, many talented individuals, and we're very blessed that way. Not all accountants either, I hesitate to add. Maybe if I just start on the independence, I suppose there's two key thoughts in my head. You asked how did we defend it. I suppose defend, protect, quality of work first and foremost. The quality of our work. I was very blessed to represent the Audit Office on Friday night in Dublin at the Chartered Accountants Ireland annual dinner. And I'm not going off on a tangent, Chair, but I think it's pertinent, but one of their key themes was trusted business leadership. And they approached us as a small employer across this island of 140 people to come alongside the PwCs, the EYs, the Deloittes, and a 2-minute video. And I can tell you I was grinning from ear to ear on Friday night when the Northern Ireland Audit Office was in the heart of that video. So a trusted business leader in that space. So bring it back to home. Our work has to go back to the values. It has to be authoritative. It has to be truthful. Unquestionable, the truthfulness, the accuracy, the factual accuracy. Our clients will often debate with us. Context, tone, but fundamentally we must have our products absolutely factually accurate, and I suppose that has to be backed up with being a wholly independent, truly unbiased organisation in terms of how we go about our.
The other thing with your indulgence, Chair, just another quick one. You actually write in England. People can understand what you write. You don't write in civil services. And whatever the communications is.
This is an extremely important question. It's purely because we're a wee bit tight for time, and we are focusing on the Fiscal Council bill and pertinence. And I agree. I'm a very happy customer of the Audit Office products.
Keep doing what you're doing,
including potentially our future work on civil service. And no further members have indicated they wish to ask a question. That's been extremely useful. I think there's some points we need to take forward. We're really grateful, Dorina and Rodney, for your time. We indeed have poached some of the talent of the Audit Office, so we're well aware of the ability. So thank you very much for coming and giving us evidence. We may correspond again if we seek any further clarification on points that were raised today. There's definite food for thought for us there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to assist. Thank
members,
you.
We're going to have a members. Yes, we're going to get a couple of agreements. There's a couple of bits of, if not follow-up information, I think a couple of specific points, including around the schedules and the independence, which has been a persistent thing which has come up in our discussions, and what that and some of the provisions on the face of the bill around independence of T's and C's and as it were employment responsibilities. So now I'm just going to ask you to turn to page 67 of the meeting pack for a convention rights memorandum which has been prepared by Legal Services. A convention rights memorandum will highlight if a bill engages any convention rights and where there any that require further scrutiny. There are no clauses in this bill which engage convention rights, and no clause in this bill engages the scope of Article 2.1 of the Windsor Framework. I'm sure certain members will be disappointed about that. They won't get to discuss that at length, but the Windsor Framework is not. Please no. It's not. I know lots of people like to talk about it, but anyway. These findings are going to be reflected in the committee's report. So if we're agreed, we'll add that to the bill folder, short as it is. Now, the next agenda item is a discussion on an options paper for consideration. So members, also included in that pack, which is page 81, are OECD recommendations on independent fiscal principles for independent fiscal institutions. This is page 86. The previous Committee for Finance report on Independent Fiscal Council for Northern Ireland, page 95. The written summary of the issues raised in the evidence received on the Fiscal Council Bill and the Department of Finance's responses. page 397, Departmental written briefing papers dated September 2024 and July 2025 at pages 424 and 429. The Fiscal Council bill itself at page 457, the explanatory and financial memorandum at page 477, and the research paper at page 485. Members, this is a discussion, which is an informal discussion. We have the bill clerk with us. It doesn't have to be our final discussion, by the way. This is an opportunity, but on a regular basis, we can discuss and flesh out some of the issues which have come before us. We don't need to make final decisions today, but it is an opportunity to discuss some of the issues. So we're going to discuss it in closed session. We still have two fairly significant oral briefings. I may skip loads of the correspondence, if that's all right, and just go straight to, particularly because Youth Assembly. Much as I love getting up to Youth Assembly.
Ruben measure.
Okay, good. Sorry, yes. Anyway, right. Agenda item 8. Members, we are agreed that the clerking team are going to reflect our very useful closed session discussion initial on committee positions in relation to clauses, which is not absolute, but we're getting a bit more information, and we're going to come back and have a further discussion once we've crystallised some of the discussion we had in relation to potential, if not full-blown committee amendments, then committee observations. But I think there may be some scope for committee amendment. Agenda item 8 is administrative and financial provisions, or committee deliberation. That's at page 522 and page 534, where there are Hansard transcripts of oral evidence sessions with the Executive Office on the 21st of January 26 and the Department of Infrastructure on the 21st of January 26. They're going to be added to the evidence base of the committee. Members, at page 85, there's correspondence from the Infrastructure Committee regarding our scrutiny of Clause 17, which was very useful a couple of weeks ago, related to the Smart Pass. Members will recall that this committee wrote to the Infrastructure Minister following the oral evidence session with DFI officials, asking the Minister for clarity on a number of issues, including modelling and fee structure for Smart Pass and confirmation of responsibility. We are awaiting a response from the Minister. If we are okay, members, we'll just seek agreement that we will share that with the Infrastructure Committee when we receive it. Are people agreed?
Thank you, Chair.
And we don't need to do anything else on the AFP bill today. Next is agenda item 9, and it's an oral briefing from our friends in Internal Audit, the Department of Finance. To assist us with this, at page 89, there's a table of the table pack. There's a clerk's memo. Page 92 of the table pack, there's correspondence from the Department of Finance. At page 548, there is a NICS, Internal Audit Services, Internal Audit Plan. On page 99, there are individual audit assessments relating to a range of things. Members, the head of the Internal Audit Service has asked that the committee agree with part of the session being closed in order to allow officials to be frank regarding aspects of the work that might undermine confidence in their work if undertaken in open session. So we can make a decision on this as the session evolves. So what I might suggest is if you give us an opening statement, and then when we get into questions, including anything you feel, that we can then go into closed session after that, just so people who are watching can get an initial sense of what you're doing. If there's anything you want to tell us that you don't want to be in open session, don't say it in open session. And then we'll make clear when we're in closed session, you can say it then. So we'll go into closed session in order to get a bit of that detail. So for now, we'll welcome Tracy McGavigan, who is head of NICS Internal Audit Department, Lacey Walker, who's head of Internal Audit Department of Finance. I should say Tracy's group head of the overall internal audit function in the civil service, and also Alan McKee, who's head of IT audit in the Department of Finance. Tracy, would you give us an opening statement? Members, indicate if you wish to ask a question.
Okay. Chair, Vice Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the role of the NICS Internal Audit Services. We welcome the time to engage directly with you and provide any clarifications on the specific Department of Finance's limited internal audit reports that you have received from the officials within our parameters. Internal Audit Services was established in October 2017. The aim was to bring together all departmental internal audit under one department while maintaining full independence in how the services are delivered across the departments as separate public entities. Centralisation created the group head role, who acts as head of profession for NICS and standard setter for the Northern Ireland public sector. Our internal audit staff are employed by the Department of Finance. They report directly to me as group head and to the accounting officers of the organisations they serve. This ensures full independence. There is no reporting to the Department of Finance on matters relating to any other department or organisation not within their responsibility. The ownership of these reports remains within the individual organisation. Internal audit services and the service we provide have evolved, and this has been demand-led, and how we provide assurance services now to all 9 NICS departments and 30 arm's-length bodies, and is seen as a key advisor to senior officials. Our internal audit purpose is to strengthen each organisation's ability to create, protect and sustain value by providing their audit committee, accounting officer and management with independent, risk-based and objective assurance, advice, insight and foresight. All internal audit work is delivered in line with the global internal audit standards and the UK public sector internal audit requirements. We promote a culture of integrity, openness and accountability across the NICS, recognising that an effective internal audit environment depends on professional scepticism supported by constructive collaboration with management. This ensures risks are properly understood, actions are owned and improvements are embedded, strengthening the quality of our work and supporting better governance across organisations. We also use this collaborative approach to drive continuous improvement, helping each organisation to learn, adapt and enhance its control environment over time, which is essential at a time of transformation in the context of an extremely challenging and tight budgetary position. We apply the standard government audit opinions and priority rates, and through our quality assurance and improvement programme, we have maintained the highest rating of compliance through regular internal and external quality assessments. All internal audit staff are professionally qualified and complete continuous professional development. Each organisation that we serve has a designated head of internal audit who works closely with senior management to develop an annual plan aligned with the organisational risks and priorities. These plans are approved by the accounting officer and the audit committee, and progress is monitored by them throughout the year. Final audit reports are issued to the accounting officer and shared with the Northern Ireland Audit Office, and the cumulative work completed helps inform our annual report and opinion used by the accounting officer to inform their governance statements. Internal Audit Services also provides a centralised fraud investigation and undertake raising concerns investigations for departments as required. I also support accounting officers and the head of civil service on complex issues when required. The shared service model has now enabled us to undertake thematic reviews across the NICS. These reviews help identify best practice, strengthen consistency and provide system-wide insight. One such review is approved by the NICS board each year. The first review of this type was Raising a Concerns Framework, and the current ongoing thematic review is in Absence Management. It is important to highlight that while internal audit resources are currently limited and recruitment remains challenging, we continue to prioritise our efforts. Our teams remain focused on areas of highest priority, directing resources towards higher emerging risks to ensure continued assurance and impact. We are aware of the individual audit assignments that are of interest to the committee today, and would be happy to provide the necessary clarity and detail within the available parameters during this session.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, indicate my first initial questions won't be hopefully too sensitive. Are you confident you have enough resource to do this role?
I'm confident that we have resource in place to do the amount of work that is required at this current time on assurance. We have other mechanisms in place. We have a staff substitution contract in to enhance that, and I'm working closely with HR policies to try and work with recruitment challenges and other methods to fill the roles.
Okay. Is it unusual for internal audits to be director overseen by the accounting officer in a relevant body? Is that normal? Is that something that normally happens?
The resources for the
so the way you are structured, you're group head of internal audit for the whole civil service.
Yes.
You sit within the Department of Finance, but
correct.
You are, as it were, not independent, but what, with a dotted line into someone else in the Department of Finance?
I'd have a dotted line to the Perm Secretary for line management, but that would be the only requirement. I report to all accounting officers, as does the relevant head of internal audit for matters for those organisations.
I suppose that's the question then. If they're reporting to the accounting officers, would that be normal practice in other jurisdictions, that the accounting officer is ultimately, they're ultimately the person? So, for example, would it work better if internal audit for the civil service was happening in a way which was utterly removed from individual departments? So the Department of Communities, Infrastructure, I'm just picking two randoms, that their audit is not done by anybody who has any dotted line into their accounting officer, but done by someone who's completely separate.
Within the other departments, there is no dotted line other than reporting lines directly in. So all the heads of internal audit for the individual organisations report directly to me. The only dotted line would be from me then to the Perm Secretary, and that would be I'd report only matters of DOF to him. Okay. Or for line management responsibilities. So we probably have a more independent. In other jurisdictions, they would be sitting within the one department and reporting with those, as is some other public sector organisations. They haven't embedded. So I would say that we have a more independence, and we have the facility to utilise staff across the group service to provide even enhance that independence.
What if a matter of serious concern arises during internal audit? What is the procedure? What steps are followed? I suppose it would depend what the matter is, but give us a worked example.
It would depend on what the issue was and who it involved, of whether reporting would go directly to the accounting officer or whether it would go directly to the audit committee. Yeah. Or all else fails, we would, if there was a significant issue that involved senior officials, then we would take it outside to the head of the civil service or to the minister. So it would depend on each organisation's governance arrangements.
Okay. And has that happened in your tenure, or is that something you might want to go into closed session to discuss?
I would rather do that in closed session. Fair enough.
But the head of the civil service does have a role then. So the head of the civil service has a role in terms of they're the ultimate sort of court of appeal, or what if there's an issue?
If we couldn't get resolution through the audit committee or the head or through the
departmental audit,
officer,
this is the departmental
audit committee, we would have access to the head of civil service or to the next board if we felt there was a systemic issue particularly. Yeah. But the requirements within each department would fall to them as accounting officer or as the audit committee. Would be our main points for an individual organisation.
Right, okay. Going to bring in the Deputy Chair now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming to the committee today. Sorry, I can't be there in person. I am a big supporter of the work of internal audit, and I think that it adds huge value. I think that it is something that probably members of the public don't fully understand or appreciate the value of the work, that if you are self-identifying areas of potential improvement and you direct your internal audit, you're actually producing those improvements and improving from the inside looking out. So I think that it's a really good thing, and it would be good to increase that awareness to show that people are trying to improve services from within the civil service. So keen to keep it an open session and celebrate some of the good work that's going on rather than to draw out the negatives. But I just wanted to ask about a little bit of sort of what the chair was touching on. How much autonomy do you have to direct cross-cutting work within the Northern Ireland Civil Service? I sit also on the Public Accounts Committee, and whenever we do reports and bring in accounting officers, a huge theme is some of the way that work and data sharing is not happening, the siloed mentalities of departments. Are you able to draw a plan of internal audit work that's cross-cutting?
Yeah, and I think that has been a benefit of the centralisation and becoming a shared service, that we're able to sit as a management team and look at those thematic reviews, and I have that unique position of being able to know what's happening across all the organisations. And in doing that, we have the support from the NICS board as well, as we do one thematic review at least a year for them, and we bring a proposal to them. So that is the autonomy for me to decide on what that thematic review and ask for their endorsement. So we do work closely with the NICS board on that as well.
Brilliant. And whenever you're doing that, would there be any particular areas of business or process or policy throughout the different departments or bodies that you would be seeing consistently underperforming across the public sector?
We would look at those. So within each organisation, if there was any areas of concern or underperformance, that would be reported within that individual public entity, and we would raise that. We would look for themes through it, and that's where our work is particularly moving towards, is identifying those themes and looking for those cross-cutting issues, and particularly through lessons learned and improvements. So looking for the best practice, looking for what can be learned from other departments. And this is an area that we have started on. It's an early development for us. We've done the first raising concerns. We're working on management, or attendance management. We're also looking at smaller areas, particularly around information management, which we know is part of all sort of concerns for all organisations, and other areas that we can see work closely within those annual reports and opinions of the individual departments as well.
Thank you. And I'll say the plan for internal audit work for the year ahead, and it does seem to be quite wide ranging and directed, and the good thinking going into the prioritisation of that work, hitting a lot of important areas. And obviously the annual governance statement highlights on it, and I think this was why I'd asked a few questions at the start, where you list in it, you know, we have a certain number of limited assurance internal audit reports, and that obviously draws them to attention, which is why then, you know, we would ask a few questions around them. And on those, it's good to see quite a lot of follow-up reports to these coming through in your audit plan. So I think as well, that's a key thing to say, that where it's limited, that's not you saying that there's something wrong. It's saying, you know, there are control weaknesses, and we're revisiting them. And I just wondered if you would be able to give us any update on anything to do with the McLeod. You had a limited audit opinion on that one, and it's obviously something that's quite you know, topical. A lot of queries coming through on it at the minute. Has there been any progress coming through on that from your own work?
I can talk to that one. We have just finished a follow-up and issued a draft report, and have actually raised that to satisfactory. I suppose, to put that report in context, it's a really complex manual process that, you know, really unique. And we can see now they have a really detailed plan in place, and they're working their way through that, and we were really comforted by sort of the progress that they've made to date. We will do further work in that area of McLeod, obviously, whenever they start to work through the figures. So we have routine work within pensions division, so we will look at McLeod again, perhaps in a different angle, but it's very positive. But it's just to reflect it was a very complex and manual process, you know, for the business area itself.
No, thank you so much, and I think that's a really important one. I would be keen to stay on top of that as a committee, as it's one that affects so many people. But thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance. I expect your work is primarily on financial matters, or can you explain? Is it wider protocols and arrangements in place, or is it primarily about spending? You know.
Our work would mainly be around the risk management, internal control and governance arrangements around all of the auditable systems that we do a planning exercise. We also work collaboratively with the Northern Ireland Audit Office from an external audit to ensure that there's no duplication of effort and way forward, and any other assurance providers or other regulators within it. But our work would be wide ranging across, and particularly with DOF being such a diverse organisation.
Okay, so are you looking at internal, as I say, procedures and protocols on, not primarily related to financial matters then?
Not all related to financial matters.
When you say risk management?
So risk management, we would look at maybe in terms of new programmes, like if the Integrate programme would be in there, we'll look at our IT systems, we'll look at different accreditations, we'll look at LPS will be into those. We'll be across the whole department, and we have a cycle of planning. So we would do a longer term plan over 4 or 5 years of identifying all the auditable areas and systems across the department. We prioritise those, and we review those on an annual basis to arrive at the plan, also taking account of any emergent issues or significant issues that we're aware of, and the assurance needs of the accounting officer and the audit committee.
And so when new initiatives have been brought forward, or are you saying you're looking for where there's duplication, or? We
would collaborate with any other assurance providers to ensure there's no duplication of effort. So if the department is receiving assurance from another independent body, then we wouldn't look at it at that time. We will be aware of the outcome of that to inform our annual report and opinion.
and including all the arm's length bodies, and to ensure, again, there's an avoidance of duplication between
Yes,
them and
within
them
any of our organisations, we'd be looking to ensure that there's no duplication of effort.
In terms of, does this come under your remit, any sort of whistleblowing or raising concerns policy if any civil servant has concerns, either about anything that's inappropriate or opportunities to make improvements, within the operation? Do they have access to yourselves directly, or do they have to go through a manager, or do they have that, as I say, that direct access to yourself?
They have direct access to us. We're named within all of the raising concerns policies within all the 9 departments and some of the arm's length bodies as well. So we'll have a direct access. We would receive those and we would help departments and provide it. It's particularly an area of high increased volume of coming through in terms of providing advisory role on those matters, and we also conduct fact-finding investigations for them in relation to those.
There can be
on demand.
Anonymity, if I can say the word.
Yes.
Respected, so somebody else or a manager doesn't necessarily know who's raised the concern.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Did you say you've seen an increased volume in those coming through?
Yes, in terms of ones coming directly to ourselves, and also attraction across the NICS, where we're providing an increased request for advisory work in that area.
Can I ask just one further?
Yeah.
Chair? I mean, and could you point, whether or not you want to go into detail, into important outcomes from individuals raising either a suggestion for improvement or a concern about inefficiency or other ways of making improvements?
I think each individual case is taken separately, so it wouldn't be to direct on one particular element of it. What we would say, there is improvements across, and the raising a concern framework at the NICS has put a higher focus on it across the NICS, and the policies going out there. We also done the raising a concern insight report to NICS board across all 9 departments and the best practice, and that has enhanced the procedures, and we've made further areas of focus for them to take forward.
And is it part of it driving a culture of continuous improvement, would you say?
It is, and we play a key role in that. Our role in that, it is important to raising concerns. It's always about making sure that culture is open and transparent and people feel comfortable to do it, and I suppose internal audit being named as one of those mechanisms for them to report enhances that independence and that confidence that it would be held confidential.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't have any other specific questions that would require us to go into closed session at this point, unless there's something you want to tell us in closed session that you suggest. So if not, then no further members have indicated they wish to ask a question. Please do correspond with us on emerging trends on internal. I think that's something we would like to understand. If you're getting loads of whistleblowing about a specific thing for the committee to discuss either in closed or open session, we would expect to be kept abreast of that. Connected to which we are doing at some point, once the PAC has resolved its intentions around the just published Audit Office report, we will be either way at some point later this year, before the end of the mandate, doing a deep dive on civil service, and it may be useful for us to hear from you again in that. And so thinking about some of the things that your function does, this is a useful initial session for us in that. So please do, we're releasing you for now, but we will drag you back with probably more detailed questions at that point. But thank you very much for coming to see us and
giving up
your time. Thank you. Cheers. Okay, members, now we've no, I think, follow-up actions other than to keep Tracy and her team on our list of attendees for civil service inquiry. Now, agenda item 10 relates to Reval 2026. And obviously, as we know, things have moved on since last week, but we still wanted to proceed with an evidence session with the relevant stakeholders from the hospitality and tourism sectors. So at last week's meeting, we received a briefing. Sorry. Oh yes, we might just do that very briefly. Given it's hospitality, we may very briefly take a comfort break if members are just for 30 seconds, but we're going to have Hospitality Ulster, Retail NI and the Hotels Federation. And we'll after that.
Okay. We'll just
members are content.
Briefly then, Chair.
Hospitality providers will understand the need for a comfort break.
Go back in, members.
Said him, but will you apologise?
Yep. We're still rotating. Hang on a second. Do you want to get the minute ready, Heather?
You should always at the same level. At the same level.
Yeah, I know, I keep forgetting. Yeah.
Still spinning.
Oh, right, okay.
We're in now.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello. Okay, members. So we're now back in open session, I believe. We have in front of us representatives from hospitality and retail who very kindly come in to give us evidence on Reval 2026. Obviously, things have moved on since the committee agreed to call the relevant stakeholders last week, but we are obviously, it's still a live subject, although the revaluation has been paused. We await to hear the next steps. But members, page 5, 6, 7, I should also say two things. Number one, FSB unfortunately were unable to attend today due to a diary clash, the Federation of Small Businesses. Members, I assume, are agreed that Hansard will provide a transcript of today's oral evidence. At page 5, 6, 7, there's a clerk's memo, and there is the oral statement from the Minister, which includes the oral statement from the Minister, correspondence from the Minister from the 29th of January, indicating to myself as Chair, indicating that he had instructed LPS to stop the implementation. Press release from the Department at page 574, correspondence from the largest cinema operator here, who is not, shall we say, thrilled with the implementation delay. Correspondence from Hospitality Ulster, which is page 577. A briefing paper from the Department of Finance at page 579, along with the draft schedule, or correspondence and publication of the draft schedule, and Hansard transcript of last week's session. So, members, worth noting that the Minister highlighted in his correspondence that there may be the need for urgent legislative steps to address the outworkings of the decision, i.e. the decision to pause the revaluation. I will be writing separately to the committee on what is required and the steps that I've instructed my officials to take in that regard. Now, this came up in oral questions earlier this week, and we still await, I guess, next steps from the Minister. But welcome, first of all, to Colin Neal from Hospitality Ulster, Janice Gold, who's the Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Hotels Federation, and Glenn Roberts, who's Chief Executive of Hospitality Ulster. We're going to invite each of you to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll get into questions. So we'll start with, just in that order, we'll start yourself, Colin, then Janice, then Glenn, in no particular order, but we'll start with yourself because you're in front of me, Colin, and you're all very welcome.
Chair, members, thank you very much for the opportunity to come along today, and look, I appreciate it's been a fast-moving situation, so events maybe have overtaken the invite and stuff. Just in case you don't know who we are, Hospitality Ulster been around since 1872. Membership base of pubs. I want to say pubs, that's a 518 category, so it could be a nightclub, whatever. Hotels, restaurants, and indeed a number of visitor attractions and the airports as well. Membership body and charged with obviously making sure our members' voice is heard. Look, as I say, and things have moved forward, and I think it now is a case of, the Minister, I think, has had a brief decision. He has listened and reacted, and that is really to be welcomed, and it's now moving forward to actually get a resolution and make sure there's a fair rate, because we are about paying a fair rate. That's not an issue. Nobody doesn't expect rates to go up, whatever. And indeed, look, it's unfortunate that some people, maybe looking forward to a reduction in this valuation went down, and it hasn't come through. So really just now keen to find a solution that is fair, equitable, and we can all get on with doing our day job. Thank you.
Yourself, Janice, thank you. Colin.
I'm Janice Gold from the Hotel Federation. We represent hotels, guest houses and guest accommodation. We welcome the Minister's decision, having faced quite a considerable rise against a fairly difficult background. This is an industry that has invested heavily and is still growing, and I suppose our largest concern would have been the lack of resource going forward and the how uncompetitive investment would have been in the longer term. So we do understand that there are difficulties for other people, but we recognise the doubling of our rates contribution wasn't really something that was palatable to anybody, nor for that matter sustainable. So we will await further instructions from the Minister and have assured him that we will engage with him and his officials to make sure that we come up with something that is more workable in the long term.
Thank you.
Chair, thank you very much. Obviously, we're in a slightly different situation than our colleagues in hospitality. We very much welcome the decision by Minister O'Dowd. I think he made the right call, stopping the reval given its potential on our colleagues in hospitality, but we also shouldn't forget that 25% of retailers also would have faced very significant increases in their rates bills. I spoke to a number of our members, one member in particular, who not only was seeing a nearly 50% increase in his valuation, it also tipped him over the line in terms of the small business rate relief scheme. So he was losing the 20% he got in small business rate relief scheme and a significant increase on top of that. He didn't do any alterations in the store in the last 6 years. No ATMs, no off licenses, no expansion, but still unexpectedly is facing a very significant increase. Filled in all the forms in the Reval as was expected. And we picked that up across the board. So it's a mistake to think that our sector got away in any way, or whilst it wasn't as bad as our colleagues in hospitality, we were hit. And of course, it is worth pointing out that retail and hospitality are the twin pillars supporting our high streets. Together, we account for most of the businesses in our town and city centres. We're already facing a high street dereliction crisis with vacancy rates at around 25%. That's nearly twice the UK national average. And indeed, had this Reval proceeded, even taking our friends in hospitality, it would have made a bad situation significantly worse. I think another ongoing furnace with the Reval process, not just with this one, but in previous ones, is that many big box out-of-town multinational retailers are still paying less per square metre in rates than many independent retailers in town centres and high streets. A member in Strabane pointed out that a well-known out-of-town big box retailer is actually paying £50 less per square metre than independent town centre businesses in Strabane. Despite that, big box retailer generating well over 100 times the footfall currently experienced in that town centre. And I think the question is, how on earth is that even remotely fair or actable? Because a lot of these big box retailers have already an unfair competitive advantage with their location, at variance with retail planning policy, have free car parking, many have dedicated bus services, and yet are still paying less in many occasions per square metre in rates than many independent retailers. Whilst we welcome the Minister's commitment to remain in listening mode, retailers now need real reflection on the challenges they are facing, clarity on what happens next, and that is important because we ourselves have nothing from LPS, nothing from Department of Finance about what the next steps are. And indeed LPS pulled out of our trade show next week as well. So LPS. I think LPS, yeah. So we need to see what are the next steps. How are we going to get that meaningful consultation about those who are directly affected? The other thing is transitional relief. This is available, as I understand, in England, and particularly for smaller businesses that have lost, who have seen increases and have now taken out of the 15,000 NEV small business rate relief scheme because they're paying additionally more if that is the case. Where is the transitional relief? I understand there was money through Barnett through transitional relief from the situation in England. I think the question is, where is that and how has that been applied in Northern Ireland? Going forward, I think what we would like to see is a new cross-sector business rates advisory group to help shape the next steps on the Reval, looking at the procedures, the methodology, and to co-design a new high street focused rates relief scheme to support independent retailers, hospitality and leisure, again modelled on the English system. I think there's some good points in the Minister's strategic roadmap on business rates. I think there's lots there that he has listened to, improving the small business rate relief scheme, phasing out the vacant property rate, introduce an accelerator scheme, which effectively is a scale-up rates relief scheme. I think these are a welcome step forward. But the elephant in the room continues to be that our members are paying the highest business rates in the UK by a country mile. A fundamental review is needed in terms of the entire rating system. We need that radical change to our broken and antiquated system of business rates. With the perfect storm of national insurance, rates and energy, our members are at breaking point with the cost of doing business crisis, which is threatening jobs, businesses and holding back economic growth. We need government at all levels to address this crisis. And of course, the other challenge that we face in the short term is our 11 councils striking their local rate And from what I'm hearing, I'm greatly worried that we're seeing well above inflation rates. That again is making a incredibly bad situation even worse. But I think from our perspective, we're in solution mode. We want to work with the Minister. I think what we need to be focusing on is how we can co-design a rating system which is fair, is equitable, and ensures that our public services get the income and the funding that they so desperately need. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And as always, members indicate several of you have already. If you wish to ask a question, I suppose I'll just start by, and thank you by the way for to the point, concise questions or opening statements allows us to get to questions. Suppose, in summary and as summarily as you can, we're all now looking towards next steps. You've given a bit of an indication, Glyn. What do you think, I'll come to all of you, I'll go back in the same order I did before, what do you think should happen next? Should it be, I suppose the Minister has paused revaluation, we don't know if that means that bills will be issued on last year's value, or not in the last year's, but on the previous valuation, or he is planning to proceed with evaluation as is, but with, I don't know, some form of transitional relief or some other mechanism, or he's going to scrap it entirely. And go. So what do you think? And take in turn, start with yourself, Colin. What is your preference for what happens next?
Chair, well, I mean, I'll give you my understanding, and apologies that I misrepresent the Minister's views. My understanding is that we are continuing at the previous Reval NIV for the next 12 months while there's time to engage and look at this. The Minister had said to us he was going to take account of the reviews in Scotland, and indeed now England have had the same problem around, and I'll maybe do a bit of explain here. You often hear us talk about the turnover model. The proper name is the receipts and expenditure model, which pubs, public houses, say, and there's a variation of the model here, and hotels are valued on. Restaurants are valued like a retail shop, so we sit across the two systems. We are, as a trade body, are going to go away and indeed compile some evidence about the problems with that. And it really comes down to that model has existed for some time. It's in law. To change it would be to do away with it would be probably very maybe radical or hard to do. But I think what we need is the formula within it, the numbers, the multipliers, because what we've seen is everything has changed in our world, particularly since COVID. That has accelerated, and the model no longer takes account of the incredible cost levels. So the profitability of the industry is really low now, and that model, the formula within it, doesn't take account of that. Obviously, again, too, we want to look at our restaurant side, and I suppose in the context of tourism is a key element of the programme for government to double tourism in the next 10 years. Hospitality provides 4 out of every 5 tourism job, so that's not going to happen unless we're able to expand and grow. So from our point of view, it will be a case of taking time now, going to look for evidence and stuff and try and bring data to the table. I'm a great believer in that old saying, in God we trust, everybody else bring data. So we will do our best to bring evidence there. And I should say, if I can use this opportunity, Chair, during a media interview I misspoke. I said I had no faith in LPS. I had no faith in the formula. Okay. Because the people in LPS are really good people. This isn't about a people thing. Everybody's doing what the system does. The system turned out that anomaly, if you like, and it's trying to create the system so that we can get back to something that is sustainable.
Okay, I'm sure that will be welcome, and I think I should put on the record. I think the committee is pretty consistently pleased with the engagement we get from LPS and the professionalism of those officials. Notwithstanding individual comments about the revaluation, I think that it's welcome that that's put on the record. Janice, what next? What should happen next?
I think from our point of view, underpinning the turnover model is this idea of it being a fair and sustainable model. So I don't think if anybody was in a normal business, it's a rentable value that you're coming to. So nobody would have expected an 86 or 85% rise in the rent. It would just be unpalatable. If you were a private landlord, it simply would not happen. So we would like to see some smoothing of that curve, how that's done. I mean, you can look towards what England did and the way they've put in different mechanisms to do it. would be slightly more challenging here based on the fact that they have the uniform business rate and we don't have. And they've also got a discount on their uniform business rate with a further transitional relief on how much their bills can actually go up by. We're in the position where our turnover is always going to rise. It has to rise. It's just a simple model that's out there. The unusual position that occurred in 2020 and 2021 was a direct result of the pandemic. Whereas turnover has risen considerably, for the majority of people, profit has not, and that has to be taken into consideration. So within the framework itself, the methodology, the primary prima facie case is it's based on the turnover model, but the mechanisms behind that we would be very keen to look at. I'm in the same situation as Colin. I believe that the Minister said to us that we were going to continue with our NAV values at Reval 2023. Part of the issue with this is there's a 30% discount in those. So regardless of what happens, if you just write the discount out straight away, your rates would automatically rise by something like 19%, because your rates bill represents a certain amount of that. Yeah. I suppose the other thing for larger businesses and small businesses is the opportunity to budget. So if you don't get these figures until January, February, March, you are basically, trying to budget. And for some people, this is a very big price ticket at the end of the week. £10,000 a week for some businesses. So the sooner we get the information, the more we can actually look at it, see how it works and move forward. We've been down through how the LPS have calculated some of the figures and are happy to work with that. But for some of the solutions, we need to be maybe a little bit more creative and find a way of smoothing that curve where we have rises in rates that are in line with inflation, not necessarily in line with a perceived rentable value.
Okay, you have discussed already, but Glenn, but please do.
I think we just need immediate clarity from the Minister what the next steps are. I think what we are outlining as need for is a structural approach to this, setting up an advisory group that can not, at times, and it's not just the finance minister, but all ministers bring us in to tell us stuff. I think what we need to be is in a position where we can help and co-design, act as a touchstone group to make sure that these problems don't arise. So it's a much more of a structural approach. I think touching on that broader high street stuff, people forget the impact that, even stripping away the impact that it would have on our members, but if the Reval had went to have the damage it would have done to our hospitality sector, would have had a huge impact on our high streets. And that 25% vacancy is getting worse. And what it needs is an executive-wide approach to our high streets. It's still very frustrating that 2 years in that this executive has not recalled the High Street Task Force, because that was the group that brought together key government departments, business, trade unions, voluntary sector, all agreeing, communicating on that sort of coordinated approach. So there's no silver bullet to these challenges. Fixing business rates is not the silver bullet to fixing the problems in our high streets. It is all government departments doing their bit incrementally is the way that we can, and I do believe that we can address this challenge. I am optimistic, but I think in terms of where we go from here, we have had no correspondence from LPS or Department of Finance. Obviously our colleagues in hospitality and hotels have been obviously engaging very diligently on this issue, but at the minute, is this a pause? Is this a 1-year suspension? Will we be back at this in January next year? Where does this process fit in with the Assembly election, which I know is all focusing very heavily in all your minds, Chair? So I think what we need is clarification about this. We have ideas about how we can get a probably structured approach to that engagement and that cooperation, but at the minute we need to see what are the next steps.
Okay, I'm going to bring in members now. Deputy Chair, first of all. And obviously
Thank you, Chair.
We're relatively tight for time, so just and lots of members wish to get in. Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for joining committee. Apologies, I can't be there in person today. And just to reiterate what others have said, in Finance Committee, we have the utmost respect for Land and Property Services and the professionalism of their valuation services. And we know that when they conducted this, they followed their methodologies, and nobody has any doubt on that. But the outworkings of that, is either going to be two things. One, they changed the methodology by which they're applying the valuations, or number two, when they bring forward what is there needs to be consideration of the wider circumstances. So we want to see the way forward as quickly as possible on this. But just on that point, whenever the valuations process was completed by Land Property Services, was there any engagement with you as sector leads to indicate what this was going to look like, or was it whenever the list was published with the average percentage increases to each sector, was that the first time you saw that, or were the organisations that you represented, were they prepared for this, or was it just a huge shock?
Sure, maybe if I could answer that. Yes, we did get a very useful briefing from LPS on the impacts on our sector. And we were obviously preparing to assist members who had concerns with their valuation about how they could appeal, how they could challenge that. We were working with LPS in terms of encouraging all our members to fill in the appropriate forms when this came out. So we were working with LPS to play our part to make sure they got the response they needed. And obviously we have a trade show next week that we wanted LPS who could deal with member queries. Now, I understand why they're not going to be there next week, but again, we need clarity of where we go from here. I do think that the methodology is where we need to be looking at, and whether that requires new legislation or new regulations there. I've highlighted that there is an ongoing problem of why big box out-of-town retail are still paying less than independent retailers, and any equitable or fairness criteria, that's just ridiculous. And all we're asking for is a level playing field. We're not asking, and I think we need to ensure that we have a rating system which is fit for purpose, that is based on accurate figures, that is accurate in terms of its valuation, that has appropriate reliefs that can help startups, can help scale-ups, can help our high streets. And a lot of this is not rocket science, and we can do this, and I think we can hopefully get to a point where that rates income is there, can help fund public services, and I do believe we can get to that point, but I think it requires a recasting of the relationships between ourselves, Department of Finance, LPS. So if there are issues or work-throughs at an early stage, that we can address this problem and avoid what happened in the last few weeks.
And maybe chip in there without repeating a lot of what Glenn says. Look, there's ongoing engagement with LPS, and I say that's why I wanted to clarify the fact that they're good people with that. I think we expected a significant increase, but nowhere near what we've seen. I was taken aback, and then obviously that fed through into the industry. Obviously I can't speak for LPS whether they were aware of just the impact and the action would be, but say with the speed of events, obviously our industry in shock and wanted to be heard, and I think it's welcome that the Minister has heard, and that's I'm on record for saying I think that's a really good demonstration of the value of the Assembly.
From our point of view, we have had communication as well, and informal communication with the valuers who we would know relatively well. I think the real concern was the delay from November through to January, which was a considerable difficulty for everybody. We had been expecting a rise, we'd expected something in rise around the 30% and something on top of that. But I don't think that people were prepared for really 84%, a number of people getting rises of 200%, which was quite a shock to them. So in terms of being warned, a couple of weeks beforehand, we didn't have that. We did have it the day before.
I think that's a key part of this. For me, that as we move forward and try to keep a clear and transparent process, we want everybody engaged and having sight of the information, not having these nasty shocks, because that's not good for anyone. It's not good for businesses. It's not good for the perception of how the Assembly works, and whilst it's good that we've been able to see this pause, I think that it's definitely a good learning that as we move forward, clear and transparent processes and engaging everybody at every stage is important. I just want to ask one more. The Minister had kept raising the point that there was low levels of responses in the process for this, especially from the hospitality sector. I just want to ask, yourselves, Glenn had mentioned, how you'd worked with people to try to get responses in. Do you think, given how this has just gone, now businesses will be more likely to have a higher level of engagement and provision of information?
And I'll maybe come in there because particularly I know there's a low level from pubs, and this has been a problem for years. It's gone round in circles with previous ministers, previous people with LPS, in that it's that the business needs to have confidence in the model before they'll put something into it, and because they've no confidence in the outworking, they just won't commit to it. So it's a chicken and egg that we've gone round in circles umpteen times on this, and I'm hoping now this will allow us to break that circle. We need to build it on evidence that people feel they'll get a fair hearing, that the model will give them a fair outcome, and I think that's the challenge. If we just are sitting here in a year's time saying, put in your accounts and see what comes out, you'll get the same level of response because they say there's not that faith.
The LPS and hotels have 162 hotels on their list. There are currently 144 hotels certified by Tourism Northern Ireland. So when we went down through it, 144 for Tourism Northern Ireland, when we went down the list, there's 135 hotels that are actually on the list at this moment in time. And of those 135, there's about 15 to 20 of them would need to have their details actually changed. So the communication system, it's quite difficult to communicate, but as businesses either change their names or rebrand, some of the names on those are quite out of date. We did go through a process where we sent back the actual list that we had from the LPS, identified the differences in it and sent that back. We also suggested that it would be worth their while having a sharing of data arrangement with the tourist board where they could pull off the certified businesses and see where they actually sat so they could work their way down through that. I do appreciate there are some 70,000 plus businesses, but certainly from our point of view, sending communication to a business that no longer exists, particularly if it's sent by email, is simply going to spam. And I do realise that, we've had challenges with this before, and it is quite important and very difficult to keep a database up to date. 40% of the hotel sector did respond, which would give you quite a large model. We haven't seen exactly who it was, but I could work it out from bedroom terms. And probably in bedroom terms, it's probably slightly higher than 40%, but there was a 40% response rate from the hotel industry.
No, thank you. And I think as well, just a final point, Glenn mentioned it came up last week in our session. I think a really important aspect that nobody had really been talking about was these evaluations could effectively knock people out of the small business relief scheme, and the huge impact that would have as well. So it'll be important as we move forward, looking for the clear process that is very much kept on the agenda as well, because it's an outworking that I think that the few businesses that have been in touch with me hadn't just fully appreciate it. But thank you very much to you all. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, no problem. Jerry Carroll's next.
Thank you. Three questions. In terms of the Minister sort of backtracking on the Reval, is it, in terms of your assessment, why that happened, is it down to kind of the outcry, I suppose, and the lobbying and the pressure applied by yourself and others, or was there any specific evidence, papers, or whatnot supplied by yourselves? What's your assessment on why he budged?
Everyone, Jerry, is it specific? Is it the whole?
Whoever wants to.
Do you want to start, Colin?
I thank the member for the question. I think it was as a case of that we didn't have time to bring data, but I think it was that listening and hearing information from the small businesses. I think lots of our small business and members contacted their MLAs. And I think it's a process again, and look, I'm on record for saying I applaud the Minister because he listened and acted, and that's what a local minister. If this had been a Westminster decision, we could have sort of made as much representation as we ever, and had no impact. So I think it's about pointing here. The Minister listened as the announcement, and you say, look, it was a short time period, and we had to mobilise quickly because of again, the list published so close to the actual rate year starting. So I say we will put in more data at this point. I believe the Minister listened and with more information made what I believe was a brave and the right call until we can get further into this.
I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. You know, the hotel estate doubled practically in value, which would have been a very difficult thing to kind of understand. So I think when the model was looked at, and I think perhaps, you know, we contribute between sort of hotels, pubs, restaurants around the sort of, you know, we contribute quite a bit to the rates when you look at it as an overall percentage of our actual turnover and profit. And
percentages of the overall rates take?
Well, the overall rates makes about 740, 720. We contribute around about 11, 12 million and around that, when ours would have gone up to over 20.
That's just hotels?
That's just hotels.
I think you go back to Jerry now, Jerry's questions.
You know, I think pubs are in around the same.
Pubs are about 15 and went to over 20. The rest is buried in the rate ordinary retail base, so we can't find it.
But I think if there had been a period of reflection, maybe it would have been easier to actually identify those particular areas and look at it and see. I think if you are basing it on a fair and maintainable principle, that is not fair and maintainable, because in 3 years' time you would have been talking about the estate doubling in value again. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the outworkings of going on a revenue-only basis or a turnover-only basis. So I think that was one of the pieces of information there. And for many people, it would have just been, the smaller businesses, it would have been very destructive to the community as a whole, particularly when we have been charged with doubling the amount we're supposed to bring to the economy. Tourism last year, on 2024, bought £633 million. We've been tasked, that's from overseas, which is considered an export. The idea is that would double by 2035. The overall figure is just over £1 billion when you take in everything, and the idea is that would rise to £2 billion. If that's the case, our rates would, by virtue of the turnover going up, our rates would actually double in that period of time as well. And that, in reality, just means that you stop building, you stop investing, and in reality, you eventually stop employing more people. And that's something that none of us want to see happen.
Okay, thanks. Just two other questions. Like, take your point about small businesses, and I agree with that, but we just think some of the bigger, especially hotel chains, bigger pubs and companies generally should be paying significantly higher rates. And if so, just have a figure in mind. I don't have an exact figure myself, but I just think they should be paying higher more generally. Like, I note the pre-tax profits in the last year are up by, it's around 26% of the top 100 companies in the north. And that's 1.86 billion, so just under 2 billion, and that's almost the exact same figure as the NAV for the total non-domestic property. So do you have an idea of, presumably you want the more profitable and income rich bigger organisations paying higher rates? Do you have a figure on what that should be?
Unfortunately not, but you know, and again, look, it'd be very hard to work for the like of us outside the system to work out. I think the key here is a fair, maintainable value and a fair, maintainable rates. No one wants to run away from paying their fair share. We all use the services. We all live here. The joy of Northern Ireland hospitality industry compared to most of the UK is it actually is locally owned. It's individual people here, which means a much bigger proportion is retained in the economy. I think it's something, I'm working off the top of my head, so don't quote me, but I think it's 56p in every pound. We buy a third of all of Northern Ireland agri-food. We are a huge employer. Hospitality is the Northern Ireland's fourth largest private sector employer. You know, yes, they have to make profit because they have to be able to reinvest and grow. You know, if you're going to refurb a bar, I've done one in the city centre lately there, it was 3.7 million just to refit it. You know, the cost now of building a hotel, astronomical. So profit isn't a bad word. It's about, are you paying a fair share, no matter what scale you are, out of that? Because it is a challenge we've seen with more taxation, and I point that at Westminster, and that Westminster has caused a lot of our problems here on it. But I've modelled a restaurant in Belfast in 2020. 32% of their turnover was taken in tax. Now it's 47%. So that's basically every time you hand that restaurant a pound, there's 50p in tax. And we'd actually like to pay more, but the problem is as the wages go up, the tax, employer national insurance contribution has gone up too. And that means you're caught in between. So it's been that UK tax model has caused problems because we are labour intensive. We're one of the few industries that are really labour intensive. We're probably one of the few industries that will stay labour intensive even after AI works its way through the system and reduces employment. And it's now getting into that balance. We've got to find a way to support labour intensive businesses where they can still remain profitable.
Chair, if I could answer Jerry's question maybe a slightly different way. I mean, the point that I was raising that about the huge growth we've seen in big box out of town retail, and one of the things we were looking at this issue, since planning has been devolved to the councils have passed way more out of town big box retail than when it used to be the Environment Minister passing. They are paying less per square metre in rates. They have all sorts of competitive advantages. And that was actually recognised when Sammy Wilson was Finance Minister, where he put a surcharge to try and sort of make sure there was a level playing field. So that's an area that could be looked at, that could address, because ultimately the issue around the Reval is that it doesn't grow the cake, it's how you slice the cake. Glad that wasn't me actually, but
don't worry, Glenn, would it cost you if it was?
So I think that is certainly an area that could be looked at. And what we're saying is you could also look at this in one sense. We have huge vacancies and dereliction in our town and city centres. We could use the rating system as an incentive for these big retailers to come into our town centres as well, to fill those derelict sites. Not very far from your constituency, Jerry, you've the Tribeca, with the Sirocco site that I was looking at the other day. All of those sites, it is unbelievable that those sites are not developed. And could we use our rating system to incentivise businesses going to those sites? And any business that locates in a town city centre, there's automatically a multiplier effect. It's bigger footfall. Footfall is so good, and that's the big worry that we had. If you had all these hospitality business closing, the impact that would have on the high street, the impact that would have on footfall, and obviously our members as well, because the future of our high streets, our town centres, it's about us creating destinations, it's about us creating experiences, and that's where retail and hospitality have to work together. And so we would have a situation where this Reval would have had the outcome, strip away the impact it had on our membership, but if it had that impact that our colleagues were illustrating so well, that would have a huge impact on and made a bad situation in our high streets better. So I think there's a way that we can get a level playing field, which is fair and equitable. There's a win-win for our high streets and town centres, but also those big multinationals start paying their way when it comes to business rates. I think that is not an unreasonable thing to ask.
Thanks. Glenn, if you could send more details to it, but that'd be really interested in following through. Just final question, just because time's under of the essence here. Obviously, Colin talked about labour, and labour, obviously, with labour of people in hospitality, there's no pubs, there's no hotels to speak of. Have any of us had any engagement with the union, the hospitality branch? Because I know they've done a lot of work around the Get Me Home Safely campaign, about trying to stamp out harassment in the workplace, both from in some cases managers, but in other cases punters, and also getting workers home safely to make sure employers play a role in ensuring workers aren't out of pocket for getting home safely. So just wondered if you've had any engagement with them on that campaign specifically.
Unite haven't reached out to us, so I can't comment on what they have, but I do know, when talking with a number of hotels that are outside town, they actually pay for their staff to go home at night in taxis. They actually take the entire cost of it, and they make a contribution to those coming there early and those coming there later. In the city centre, it probably maybe isn't as much of an issue, and we are keen to be sustainable, therefore use public transport provision that's been put in place, particularly the night buses. But I've spoken to a number of hoteliers who actually do fully fund their workers getting to and from their employment.
Okay. If you have any details on that, I would be keen if you could share that. That would be really interesting in terms of if you have the numbers or anyone specifically who could, because that'd be really helpful.
Okay. If anyone else wants to take that one, happy enough. Okay.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Happy enough, sure. Okay. So we'll move on now to Hi Harvey.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good to see you today. First of all, it's been good to hear that the Assembly has been useful. That's a good point. That's made a difference, which is great. In terms of engagement, you have all seemed to have different levels of engagement. Maybe you could each tell me a wee bit more about that. I thought it should have been the same for everyone, but it seems to be different across the board. If you could.
Well, all I can say in terms of the Reval, we have been engaging with the LPS. Obviously, we're in regular contact with the Department of Finance. I have to say our engagement with the Department is very good. I mean, I know at times that they sometimes get an unfair bad rap, but we had a situation in Kilrea when the bridge closed that Department of Finance were very quick off the ground to establish the Rates Hardship Fund. And that did make a big help to those traders in Kilrea who were suffering because of the bridge closure. So I have to say, in terms of the ongoing engagement we have with the Department of Finance, LPS, is it good? Yes, and it's clearly that the Minister listened to some of the issues that we were putting forward, whether it's startup rate, which has been a big help in with those first year costs of any new small business, and secondly the scale up side as well, where the Minister's outlined the need for an accelerator programme, which again is a pull through from the rest of the UK. So I think our engagement is good. I think just really the point that I was making, let's put it on a probably a more structural way, a much more coherent way, that we can have that on a more measured cross-sector basis.
Yeah, I have to say, with Department of Finance officials and LPS, they're very good. They always, like, if you ring, they come back to you, and there's always an exchange of information, and that's really useful when we're working things about like the review of the small business rate, with consultation, different stuff like that. I think it's back to that fundamental challenge we have in that the formula within the receipts and expenditure, the turnover model, they're stuck with it. They can't change it. And until we break that cycle, we keep coming back to an issue like this.
Concur with what Colin says. The issue is the rates model. People are nervous about engaging with it. And I think the LPS have been faced with the challenge in that, which is a difficult thing. But until we come up with a methodology that is simpler in many ways for smaller businesses as well, and I think all of us, I would have to say, if you pick up the phone, you certainly get a response very quickly. I would have no difficulty with that at all. I think since COVID, we've had good engagement with them, and if we know we need a question answered, it's there. But there is a fixation on this turnover figure, and we basically need some way of sort of finding a transitional way of solving that particular issue, which gives people within the industry faith in the process.
I mean, that's great news. I mean, it's very good when people are at the end of a phone rather than just, you have either a dedicated person or someone at least you can have confidence in. So I take it those conversations are and will continue.
And we have to be, solution based as well. It's not just about reacting.
Yes.
I've always said that, in terms of the programme for government generally, that shouldn't just be an arrangement between four political parties. It should be, a co-design effort between broader civic society, and because there's indicators that are key performance indicators, there are outcomes there. I think that is crucially important, that we are in solution mode, and obviously Colin and I have been putting lots of ideas about rates over the years, and we are hitting home in some of them, and the Minister's strategic roadmap and rates was a good step forward. Is there more that needs to be done? Yes, there is.
At least you feel you are being listened to. Anything else you wish to add, Colin?
No, I think it's fair. Look, there is, and I think this is an opportunity, to reset the dial and engage again, which I look forward to.
Okay, Ryan, you're next, Ben Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. Just trying to understand what happened last time. Reval 23, I think it was based on 21 values. So I think there was a recognition of COVID effect at that time. So I'm not sure, was it a sort of a discount applied, or was it just in the valuation of turnover that 20% for pubs, 30% hotels, more or less?
And we have a thing. The model is supposed to come out with what is a FMT, a firm maintainable trade, for an average operator of a premise. Because we're coming out of COVID, there was an adjustment made behind the scenes. So it wasn't we got a bill and said this discount is off your bill. There was an adjustment made. Rough figures was about 20% reduction for pubs, public houses, and about 30% for hotels. And we had been talking about, obviously, that coming off, given that the world has actually got worse since COVID, was a huge challenge in itself. And that coming off then, plus the high rises, have all been factors in how we got to that incredibly high increases.
The way that Reval works is that Reval takes 3 years trading. So the 3 years trading that were taken for Reval 2023 included COVID. So in a very unusual circumstances, people's actual turnover had gone down because you had a period of 20 and 21 where you had trading severely curtailed. So your actual NAV automatically dropped because your turnover had gone down. Then in recognition of the challenge of that, there was a further discount applied. I suspect because of the way that our rates are actually calculated, unlike the UK model, it was applied at the NAV as opposed to the actual rateable pound, because you would have had to apply a different percentage. Currently, the uniform business rate is 48 pence in the UK. They've dropped it for businesses to 43 pence. That would be a very difficult thing to do here, given that you have 12 different organisations involved in the setting of rates, if you take the 11 councils plus the regional rate being struck by the Assembly. So when you add those two together, so the simplest model to do it was to actually take it off the NAV. So when people got their NAV figure in 2024, that actual NAV figure was discounted by 13% or 30%. And 30% would really, your rates sort of represent about 60% of your NAV. So that was a good discount for businesses and worked well and was an easy model to understand and an easy model to put forward. I will say it was probably considerably less than many businesses in England and Wales got, but it was a good model for us at that time and did recognise the difficulties.
And I don't know, what was the Reval before that? Was it 2020?
Reval before that was 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
We go by list, so we're currently on list 10. So we had list 9 and list 8. So if you go through the number of lists, if you take from list 9, it's always gone up, but you take from list 9 to list 10, you see a sort of a 90% increase overall. So we've actually gone back as far as list 7 and looked at how it actually went. So up before COVID, it would have always gone up due to the fact that turnover automatically rises. So you're compounding that over a period of 3 years. So even if you rise with inflation, and inflation sits at 3%, you're probably up, my compounds is not always going on, but it's about 11% it'll rise by when you take in the compound figure. But if you take the inflationary figures that have come in from really 2022 through to 2024, you will have a massive rise in inflation. So therefore people's turnover will have increased considerably as a result of that. So that is one of the big issues that you have when you go for this turnover only based figure, because you've nothing to mitigate against it. You can't, for example, mitigate against your, a very good example would be your car park. Your car park is there, your car park's part of your actual estate. The actual cost of insuring your car park, maintaining your car park and patrolling your car park has gone up quite considerably, but you have no methodology in which to actually get that off your rates bill. It's just a straightforward turnover model, and at the bottom of it there is no kind of recognition of any fall in profit or any mitigating circumstances that you may have. COVID sort of threw the whole thing out of kilter and threw most people's rate system out of kilter. So we had the very, very unusual circumstances of rates actually decreasing. And one of the other factors that affect is this investment. So if you've been a 2-star hotel, you may have moved to being a 3-star hotel or a 4-star hotel by means of investment. You may have added on additional product. That will also affect your NAV. So you are effectively facing the prospect of being punished for investing while you're trying to grow business and create more jobs. And that of itself creates an issue.
Is that different anywhere else?
Our model is based, in the UK it's a little bit similar, but our model is actually based on hotel star rating coupled with a percentage. So if you move from basically 1-star up to 5-star, we currently have no 1 and 2-star hotels. We have a large cohort of ungraded hotels who are ungraded because they maybe trade under a brand which doesn't sit within the grading system, or they've made a choice of doing so. So in reality, you are possibly effectively discouraging people from moving up the grade. Having said that, we've spent £500 million since the end of the pandemic, and the idea is that we will spend probably 100 million to 200 million over the next 2 years. You will have probably 3 hotels will open this year, and you will probably have in the region of 4 to 5 hotels. Some of them might end up being classified as guest accommodation, but there is a big movement of investment, and that's the one thing you really don't want to stop. You want to ensure that that grows. We also have the beauty of being able to create jobs anywhere in Northern Ireland. It's a good regional spread. The basic model is 1 bed equals 1 job. So we can create a hotel, could be a resort hotel, in somewhere that nobody else is really going to do something. People like this idea of being somewhere remote. They can go, they can stay for the weekend. And that's something that you need to consider. One of the big fixations on this is about size, but some hotels need to be large to cover the costs. If you want to take in a whole segmentation, you want to take in bus tours, you want to do conferences, you want to do meetings and events, you have to have the number of bedrooms to facilitate that.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask about retail, Glenn. So whether there was any discount in 2019, was there any COVID impact at that stage?
Well, obviously, our members got the rates holiday, and I suppose the biggest issue is that other parts of the UK it was phased out, whereas we had the big cliff edge, and that was a huge.
But that didn't change the NID.
No, it didn't. It didn't. That was more of a. A lot of ways that cast back to 19, all these revals seem to blur into one. Mm-hmm. I think for us, it's about, what we were, I think particularly the 2019 one, there were a lot of concerns. We helped a lot of members who appealed it. I think there was a good level of those appeals were upheld. So we were very focused. This one and the reval before is about assisting our members who thought that their valuation was wrong, helping them appeal that and get better outcomes. And there's a number of them that we did get that. So, but obviously with this current reval, we don't know the status of it. Is it gone for good? Is it paused? Is it coming back? Is it coming back with our colleagues in hospitality getting a transitional relief? Again, these questions we can't answer. I think that's why the Minister needs to make clear what are the next steps in this.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, in particular, it says in our report, retail overall in 26, Reval was an increase of 9%, Belfast higher, around 15%. So, I was approached by shops in Ballysillan. Yep. They're all getting 60% increases, small shop units, independent units. What are you hearing?
Yeah, we heard the same thing. Increasingly, the calls we got and emails we got were from independent retailers in North and West Belfast. Mm-hmm. I don't know quite why that was the case. And again, the example that I gave earlier was of a retailer who hadn't done anything to a store, but yet had a very significant increase. Couldn't believe it. Lost the small business rate relief scheme. So I don't know quite why that was the case. You can get variations. One street has a lower rate than the next street. You have all sorts of variations of this, which sometimes don't make sense at all. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if a business has put investment into their store, has put an ATM in, or put an off license in, or put a post office in, that does reflect obviously the valuation, and they would expect to pay more. Now, I think that's why that I think it'll be interesting to see where the department goes with this accelerator program, which effectively would mean if a business was to upscale, that as I understand what is being proposed, that they would pay the old valuation in their for a year rather than the new valuation based on their upscaled or scaled up business. I think that's a good idea. I think that's important that that is got over the line as quickly as possible, because we do talk a lot about startups, we don't talk a lot about scale-ups. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're to grow our economy, we've got to make Northern Ireland the best place to start, scale up and locate a business.
What's the mitigation you'd like to see?
What it was being proposed in the Minister's strategic roadmap is a type of scale-up scheme. As I understand it, it's called the Accelerator. And what that is, and I stand to be corrected on this, that effectively if a business does scale up, creates new jobs, enhances their store or whatever the type of the business is, they're obviously going to be revalued and pay more rates as a result of that. And what I understand the proposal to be put forward by the Department of Finance is their old valuation would stay for a year. So you're building an incentive in there. I think there are other incentives that we could go. For instance, we have outlined the need if a business invests in green technology, in carbon neutral. Again, that they should be able to get assistance with the rates in that, so you're incentivising green growth. Could you go further and use our rating system as an incentive to attract FDI in areas of high unemployment, in the west of the province, where we have traditionally poor levels of FDI? So I think it's about using the taxation power that we have, the only taxation power that we have at the minute, and that's rates. Could we use it strategically to attract FDI, scale up, start up? We believe that it could be possible, with that, and get the returns that we all want to see.
If I could chip in there, because our restaurants fall into that retail classification, they're not in the turnover model, and that we've seen there, double figure increases for our restaurants. And it is, it's supposed to come up with what is a rentable value.
What do you mean, double figure?
20, 25, okay. 30% increases. And, again, if it's supposed to come up with basically a rentable value that your rates are based on, I mean, you wouldn't get those rents. They're just not feasible. One in my head is a pub, but if you take Horatio Todd's now on the turnover model, albeit, their rates went up from 2,000 a week to 3,500. If your landlord knocked the door and says, I'm putting up your rent by that, which is basically what it's supposed to represent, you'd be giving them the keys.
Well, just on that point briefly, part of what LPS would say to that is you can't actually be 100% sure because of how the multiplier would play itself out, and so the calculations done on the back of the NAV were not 100% guaranteed. Did they say that back to you whenever you said, look, we're really concerned about the increase in bills?
We got an average figure, which was going to be 0.633, and it was from 0.611, I think, for the previous, up to 0.633. Yeah. So we multiplied that we brought in a rating expert, so he multiplied it out for us so we could see where the increase was. So you had the increase in your actual rate pound, coupled with the increase of your NAV, but the NAV is the big increase. Yeah. Even if you'd run with NAV without the discount, you were still facing quite a considerable, about a 22% rise in your rates, even without that. And then when you added in the NAV increase on top of that, and the sort of the factor where you went 0.63, 0.63 effectively is 20 pence more than businesses in England and Wales are paying in the hospitality, and it's the hospitality leisure business. That's what the retail, hospitality and leisure are paying that. So they're getting a discount back to 0.43, whereas our average rate was recommended to be 0.63. We understand that rate will probably now be slightly higher because the rate pound will be adjusted slightly upwards to account for the fact that Reval 2026 will not be applied in the 2025-26 year. So 26-27, sorry, I'm a year behind. Yes. 26-27. So we understand that it might be actually go up slightly higher.
Yeah. I think I'm right in saying that you wouldn't accept that as a reasonable point back. Not that you're not saying they're unreasonable, but you would say based on all of the available information, you can be fairly clear that there would have been.
We based it on a prudent sort of mid-scale where we were. We didn't go to the highest, we didn't go to the lowest. We went to the median.
Exaggerating on the basis of just the NAV. You were doing calculations.
The NAV model. If we took the NAV model and worked it on 6.611, we could see the increases from that. So we took that and we took the new model and looked at it and saw where the increases actually fell.
I just wanted to get that on the record. Steve Aiken's next, then Gemma, then Deirdre. Steve.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, and thanks very much. The declaration of interest, I've probably talked to all of you, probably not you, Janice, but I've talked to the other two sort of fairly regularly on this one. Just looking at the LPS's own figures and the rest of it, sort of pubs are about 1.6% of the slice of the rates. Hospitality or hotels are about 1.7%. Pubs went up, NIV went 47%, hotels on average went up sort of 84%. But bear in mind that is just 3% of the overall total, and everything else sort of sits around about roughly what we thought was going to be about the 30% figure, just about what's matters. How did LPS manage to get it so badly wrong?
I think it's fair to LPS, not wrong in the sense they have applied a formula that they're required to apply. It just, the formula just throws out the wrong number now. It doesn't take account. I mean, if you take it, the world has changed in hospitality. You know, labour costs are incredibly high now. You know, our energy costs are the highest. You know, on the island are the highest in the UK. You know, just rack up everything. Like beef, I think beef is up now over 50% this year. And whilst we talk about inflation as, you know, coming up to 4%, it doesn't mean all the other stuff went back down. You know, so it has got to the stage. Our turnover looks incredibly high, but the profit has actually gone the other way and down. So the fact it takes that doesn't account for those costs within it. Doesn't account for like in our world. You have to invest heavily, you know, and what happens as soon as you invest, your rates go up. It's a bit like because that suggestion actually came from one of my members about an investment thing, and the problem is this sort of model goes straight away. Well, that's now more valuable, therefore it would rent for more. And I think in fact if you're paying because you are an independent, that's our industry is, you know, 99.9% Northern Ireland independent people. There's not taking account if you've got all that debt to pay. You know, you've got millions of pounds to refit your bar. You know, and things like, you know, they'll take notion of like Sky TV is based on your NAV, and it's crazy. Like you'll have a small rural premise, maybe have been like £500 or £600 a week. You know, but if you don't have it, the people don't come in, and then your NAV goes up, and all this goes up. So we're in a vicious circle where the formula hasn't caught up with the actual real
world. I remember,
Colin,
when we were having previous discussion, we were concerned about it going up by 30%.
Yep.
That's where where the concern lie. And it just seems very strange to me because it is just 3% of the overall total, but it's disproportionately particularly high. And I understand, LPS have told us and all of this, the rest of it, and it's just a spike. I mean, there seems to be a complete lack of communication going back and forth. Now, you know, I actually admire John O'Dowd as the minister, and I can't believe when this was presented to him, somewhere along the line, somebody should have said, by the way, there is a huge spike here that sits above the sort of the 30% line. The huge spike is coming from hospitality and sort of hospitality and the hotel sector, which is very remarkable.
Yeah, for such a small sector, I think it was something like 16.5 million increase, which, you know, for something that makes up such a small part of that rate base. But look, I would say, like you, anyway, I had great admiration for the minister before this, and I actually think that's increased because, you know, the devolved minister listened to constituents, listened to people telling them that this didn't work, it was wrong, and he took the decision to amend that.
I just find it really, I mean, because it really stands out. You look at the figures, I'm looking at the table here, I'm looking at the pie chart, and it's like, this is how much it represents, this is how much, you know, if you look at where the increases are. And I think that stands out as well. The other thing that stands out is the increased money that's coming in from warehousing and the rest of it, but the fact that they've pushed the percentage down. So obviously what we're saying is big box Glen taking more and more of the sector, but actually the take, even though it's gone up as a percentage, is being pushed down. It seems to be a disproportionate. I mean, if we're trying to revitalise the high street or create jobs and the rest of it, how are we achieving that by building big warehouses?
And of course, we have a situation in a few towns where big retailers are trying to get the warehouses converted into retail use, to Class 1 retail. Listen, it is of grave concern to us what a lot of the councils are doing, granting more and more out-of-town big box, when we have twice the UK national average in terms of dereliction. And that's not just empty shops or empty bars or restaurants, that's empty buildings, full stop. So I do think that this is something we have asked the infrastructure minister to call in a number of these applications. What we want is you know, we're very clear. We want to see those big retailers come into our town centres. We have got endless amounts of vacant space for them to come to locate in, and when they locate there, it's a multiplier effect, it's footfall. All I would say is that that it's all about ensuring that we have a level playing field, and that's really all we're asking for. You know, that when they have the unfair advantage that of free car parking, many of them have bus routes, and we know the challenges that many of our members have with issues around car parking, public transport, and so on. So I think from our point of view, it's about leveling the playing field. And this is an area that we have highlighted on numerous occasions to LPS, and it might well require new regulations or new legislation to adjust that, to make sure there is a level playing field. And I doubt, if that probably was the case, you may not have seen such extravagant increases in my colleagues. Yeah. You would have seen
it just doesn't.
Yeah.
And my final point, and I think Glenn, you mentioned it. If you didn't, well, I apologise, but I knew you would mention it anyhow. This business about land banking, and we're not taxing land banking. In particular, we're saying if you have a look at sort of the warehousing and the rest of it, and the implications of that. Sort of the large number is particularly within our sort of brownfield area sites, and the rest of it are just sitting there again and again.
Yeah. Well, this is why I think it was welcome that in the Minister's strategic roadmap that he addressed the issue of the vacant property rate.
Yeah.
Because essentially this was the department subsidising dereliction. Yeah. And you had a whole industry of landlords trying to get out of paying rates, taking the roof off, doing what they... And what we should say is that, we should not be... that those, if we're going to get this land moving and in practical use, and maybe it's not just for retail or hospitality or for business, it could be for housing, for social housing, that many of our towns and many, we have a housing crisis here. So I think it is absolutely right that the Minister address this issue of the vacant rate, and to make sure that people pay their fair share of rates. But also, again, how can we use the rating system to incentivise, particularly town centre regeneration? How can we use it to incentivise potentially foreign direct investment as well? So I think, fair play to the Minister, he's indicated that's his direction of travel. I think we need to go further and faster at it. I would hope that, we've got April coming up very soon. We're not, then we get into the Assembly election. So I worry that some of the things that he's brought forward in his own paper may not see the light of day, because obviously there's a legislative backlog as well. But I hope that that's not the case.
Thanks very much, Teacher.
Okay, Gemma Dolan is next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for coming in. I just have one quick question. Most other questions have been answered through the session. You say that businesses are nervous about returning information to LPS. As representative bodies, what can you do to increase engagement and returns and to build that trust and confidence in LPS?
I'll maybe jump in there because I've had a lot of involvement in this. What we need is a model that they can see as fair. If that formula was fair, there would be no problem. It's purely, they know if they engage, but in their accounts, the model will crucify them. And that's the bottom line. And I've tried I'm in this job for too long, probably a lot of people would say. The whole time we've tried to get that message through. And I think particularly since COVID, it has been exaggerated incredibly, because our turnover, that headline figure, has shot up purely because of the cost base that we now face.
I think that your point and Steve's point is a really good case of hindsight. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. And if this had been, flagged up and dealt with maybe in November, we would have maybe found ourselves in this particular situation. We are a small contributor, and maybe that was the fact that it was kind of glossed over. But I think if we'd had the hindsight to look at it, we could have taken it and worked our way through it. There would have been a transitional relief scheme that could have worked to actually remove that particular burden and kind of smooth out the curve. We've spent quite a bit of time engaging a rates expert, getting a reduced rate for members if they want to get advice, and I think that that's quite important. But the bigger picture in this is that we've got to come up with a methodology that is simple for people to return, easy to do, and if you've multiple businesses, you can pull your data out. A number of people don't realise you could have 5 businesses, one of which is an accommodation business, and 4 others all feeding into the same P&L. So it's quite difficult to pull that out. I think there's a job of work to be done to restore some sort of balance within the system, and I think we have a job of work to do to ensure that the actual methodologies that are there are looked at and adapted in a way that members find more comfort with and are confident that they're going to get a fair deal.
If I maybe come in just to finish that again, I think what this process has probably highlighted too is how fragile the industry is. There are so many people now operating, actually subsidising their hospitality business out of their own pocket. And we've got to a point that I think it was just the size of the increases and the current state of the industry, that the two collided, that there was nowhere to go.
Just from our perspective, Gemma, we were very, very clear in all the communications with the members, fill in the forms, because I take what Colin and Janice were saying, because we have helped a lot of our members. We've got rates experts in to help and assist them with that. And obviously, it strengthens their case if they had put the forms in and did the process. So we were very clear. I think in terms of the figures that we got when we got the brief from LPS a few weeks ago, that's 40% of the retail sector, which is quite a good figure in terms of respond, which I think is a bit more than our colleagues in hospitality and hotels. So we continue to say, look, please put your forms in. If there's a problem, let us know. And we were actually very geared up to assisting members with the current or former Reval, whatever you want to call it, and to make sure that if they want to appeal, we'll help them do that. And the last Reval, we had a good track record in getting appeals upheld, and so that's where we were focused on.
Okay, that's fair enough. Thank you, and Chair, that's my questions.
Deirdre is next.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming in and for your evidence. And I suppose following on from the last point, I mean, even in LPS's evidence session last week, they said that they haven't come up with a better or fairer methodology. And obviously the methodology is something that you've all raised. We are dealing with very different sectors as well, and there's obviously tension that can be created amongst those different sectors. So I suppose I want to ask, in looking at the methodology and I suppose the next piece of work going forward, have the sectors been talking and the representatives' bodies across all of those different sectors, even beyond hospitality? Do you believe that there is commonality, or there's areas that you can agree on in terms of an agreed methodology going forward?
Yeah, I'm maybe I mean, in our turnover methodology, I think it's down to the formula behind it, and I hope that we can bring forward evidence to show that the formula itself now no longer results in what we class as a fair maintainable trade, which then your NAB is based on. I suppose, look, this has been a very fast process. So again, keen to actually engage with other sectors. I think it is important. Look, we know, you'd be a fool to think you're not due to pay your fair rates. Yeah. It's finding something that in our sector you can pay. And I think the if you like, the overall rateable based on a property model, I think everybody, UK government, Labour was on their manifesto to change it. I think that the big problem is, what do you put in its place? And that's the $10 billion question. If somebody comes up with, I want to copyright it and be share of the royalties. But I do think particularly on that receipts and expenditure turnover model, that there can be alterations made there. And they're not to the scale where it's going to impact the whole rate base to that much. We are a small part of the rate base, but I do think it is time we do look at, is everybody paying their fair share?
There are four sectors that use the method that we use: car parks, cinemas, ourselves and petrol stations. So I think there are things that we can do behind the scenes to tweak it. Yes. And I think there are mitigations that we can look at. In the longer term, I think people would be keen to see the methodology changed and simplified, and also so that you could budget better. If you knew for the next 3 years what, the rate pound might change, but you knew what it was, so you could actually cover your implications. And it's also a question around investment. That's a big thing. If you have 100-bedroom hotel and you buy 100 beds, that's £100,000. And that's something that, the message that we would be quite keen to get across. I think being wed to turnover as a standalone, one single metric, isn't a good idea. It's one statistic. We need to have stuff sitting underneath that is easy to adapt, comes up with a more equitable system. I mean, the key thing in this for us is fair and maintainable. And maintainable is really about sustainability. This is an industry that you want to sustain. You don't want to have derelict buildings that were formerly hotels, pubs, restaurants, or for that matter, retail. And I think that's an important part of it. But it's got to be something that's workable and clearly transparent for everybody.
I suppose my other question too was feeding into societal shocks, because obviously the anomaly here was COVID played a part in terms of when yous were last assessed. The previous anomaly where this happened was back in 2009-10, which was the financial crash. So learning from that we're now getting more frequent societal shocks, which have an impact on different sectors at different points. I suppose beyond the methodology, are there other things? I mean, have you identified that these are now recurring things that happen globally and global impacts in terms of societal shocks here, how we can mitigate those in the future? I mean, is it interim reliefs, or are there other things to the methodology or the structure more holistically that we could be changing to ensure that we're future-proofing this as we go forward?
I think we have to wait partly for the Minister to come back from some things, but we've been through 9/11, SARS, COVID. There's been a system, a number of people have introduced a capping system, which actually allows you to smooth the curve and sort of sees that is one way of doing it. The transitional relief is another way of doing it. The transitional relief model has been deployed very well in other areas, and it could be something that works. But until we actually see the Minister's kind of turnout of what his longer term plan is, this really in reality should come back out in November 2026, which is a mere 9 months away. And we think that's a very short period of time. It's, somebody, I said to somebody, it's the gestation period of a small human. We unfortunately don't want to be in the gestation period of an elephant, which is I believe 18 months. So we really need to make sure that we have something in place. But the starting point for us is we will look at some solutions, but in order for us to bring those forward, we need to see what the Minister's plans are. Is Reval 2026 halted? Is it going to be reapplied with some new metric within it? Or is it going to be actually shelved and we remain with the 2023 Reval? And those are questions that we unfortunately can't answer at this moment in time. And I know the Minister has been quite cognitive and thinking about things, so they are maybe taking time to work with LPS to look at how this might translate in the future, and I think that's an important thing for all of us. We certainly have had a number of discussions between the different elements of our industry and different ideas that people have, but until we actually see what the plan is in the short term, then there's two very big questions here, 26 to 29, and then what happens after 2029. Scotland are doing a review. Will the English review refer to, English went up, the English hotels went up 76%, but 76% multiplied by 43p meant that the rates didn't go up that much. Plus they also had a cap of 30% on their increase. So all of a sudden they were in a totally different position to us. So if you have a Hilton in Manchester and you have a Hilton in Belfast, it's really not comparable in any way. So the model there had taken a reduction in the rate pound, a capping of the bill, and transitional relief, which was one way of looking at it. Again, a small sector, but looking at how that could be supported. And that would be the point from us. If we only have 9 months to do this, it does sound like a long period of time, but in actual fact, it really isn't. It's a snapshot.
I suppose to answer in one sense why we have articulated the need for the small business rate relief scheme to be changed and targeted into leisure, independent retail and hospitality, because that obviously is the model that I think Janice was referring to in England. It targets the relief to the businesses that are still the pillars, the mainstays of the high street. The current small business rate relief scheme, yes, is welcome. The Minister's considering extending to 20,000 NEV. But the issue is this: there's lots of businesses that don't need it, that get it. My office in Ballyhackamore gets it. I understand I may get in trouble for this, but MLA's office also get it. Wouldn't it be better of that pot that the Minister has for small business, that it's targeted to the businesses that need it the very most, rather than giving it to businesses who don't need it? And that's not picking winners. The reality is the future of our high streets is still going to be retail, hospitality, leisure. They're still going to be the mainstays, and that's where our view in terms of the various consultations the Minister's doing, a targeted approach to small business rate relief scheme, because obviously there's money going to be coming in from phasing out the vacant property rate. I think you could also look again at reintroducing something Sammy Wilson when he was Minister in terms of that big out-of-town retail, which I think was over 500,000 square feet. Again, so you could actually reprofile through the rating system through a lot of the reliefs and get the outcomes you want. But I still think we need to have an open, honest discussion about the methodology of the Reval, because we can't come back and do this every year or every couple of years. The other thing is, what happens is, are we going to have Reval 26 2.0? Is it shelved? Are we going to reduce this in 3 years? Now, that would leave a significant gap if this is picked up again in the new mandate. Then you're going to have a higher cliff edge, because you're going to have lots of businesses in that time that have increased in size. And we had the valuation a few years ago. I think it was 10, 12 years. There was a gap there. And that
2019.
That's right, yeah. So I can remember, I mean, I was in the same position as my two colleagues were at that point. I can remember not long into the job, because it was so long since there was a Reval, the world had changed several times. And if whatever happens next, if we leave it for another 3 years, I just worry that, are we going to have more cliff edges? Are we going to have other sectors sitting where my two colleagues are sitting? And so that's where we need to engage with the Minister and see, look, what are the next steps. We believe that we can do that best on maybe a structural, a new standing group which is there, that can work through problems, advise the Minister, deal with problems as they come up. And I think that point Janice has made, if this had come out in November, we might have had a bit more room to manoeuvre on this.
If I might jump in there, and you mentioned those shocks, and obviously we get global shocks and then ones related to ourselves. I think one of the big things is having a system that looks out and see what industries are impacted from those shocks. Hospitality, we live at the very end of the discretionary disposable income. If money's tight for whatever reason, whether that's financial shock, cost of living, whatever, we're the first to feel that pullback. Because you move from let's go for a meal on a Friday night to let's get a meal deal from a supermarket or whatever. So we're very vulnerable to that space. And also the fact, and I think it's a really good thing, I am really supportive of the fact we have a really unique industry here that very few places have locally owned businesses. Normally they're big chains. So their profitability is nowhere near. I mean, if I pick out a pub, sector, Stonegate, nothing personally against them, but 4,600 pubs, there are 1,100 here. The buying power of that, nobody can match it here, because most of them are just themselves, or they own two or whatever. So that buffer of profit margin is never there for them to absorb its shock. And we are now operating in a world where we can't pass on the costs, because we know our customers don't have the money. So again, you keep suppressing the profit margins. So it's finding a model that, okay, you have our standard. Hopefully we can get to a point we can have a fair rating model, but then there's something overlooks that, is continuously scanning to go, okay, that shock, what sector has that hit? And it may not be our sector, it may be exports because of the challenges with America or whatever, but there's some reaction within that. And look, I do really appreciate, it's about like saying, well, your rates can't solve all your problem because a lot of these taxes are Westminster. But the problem we have is, after Westminster take theirs, it's what money we've got left, what can we afford to pay from that? Because we look at our counterparts in GB, they've had, I should say on record, look, again, the adjustments after COVID were very welcome, and we did make that point. But if we compare them to GB, they had 2 years at 70%. A year at 40, and they had much bigger systems to weather the storm. So I think it's finding something overarched that can, you make a very valid point of those shocks. Who have they hit? How do we mitigate for that to make sure they survive?
I suppose just my last week, quickly, Chair, was, Janice, you talked about certainty and just having the lead-in time, and obviously doing more, I suppose, ongoing revals, is obviously part of that because of the gap that was presented after the financial shock. I think the next one wasn't until 2015 or 16. So that was a huge gap. But also aligned to that, I suppose, the importance of having a 3-year budget. So just trying to get your views, or, in terms of that. I know there's an additional 10 million that's proposed in that, in terms of the small business rate relief. There's the ongoing consultations. As you say, there's a number of different parts to this, but just your view in terms of trying to get the 3-year budget then in this next period, hopefully before the next election as well, Glenn, as you talk to, because focus will shift. So just to get your views of that, and I suppose the recent consultation on small business rate relief, I know you touched on some of it, but just, you know, your views in terms of some of the headlines that you'd like to see coming out of that.
The no business could run on a yearly budget, you know, and I look at yourselves and go, how can you? You know, and look, I've seen it with government bodies where, you know, they're never quite sure what money they've got to the end of the year, which means you can't buy well yourselves, you can't plan and stuff. So I think a 3-year budget is essential, and that's just taking it just from a business view. I appreciate from a government view there are more complications there, but I can't see how you can budget. And on the small business rate relief, you know, I think I agree. Look, we need to start using our rate system to back the you know, the ones that we want to grow, and that sounds cruel, but if you're a private business, you invest in the bits of your business that you can get growth. So I think it should track what's the programme for government. You want to grow small businesses and stuff because that's their backbone. Then it's actually how do you help them do that? Because again, if you look at the rural pub and stuff, you know, in England it's 100% rate relief because they see the value of that as a community asset. And I appreciate you cannot, you know, if we get a X pounds in Barnet consequence, it doesn't buy the same in rates manoeuvrability here as it would in GB. But I do think we need to maybe get more focused in that space and with the small business rate relief be more targeted, as Glenn would say.
And you know,
I think for us, if you look at the tourism market, so if we have a 3-year plan, we can buy media for 3 years, which allows us to promote. We find ourselves in the unique position of being attached to a country where the VAT rate is either 11 or 7% lower than us. But if we have the ability to buy and we have the ability to promote, that is quite important, particularly with the role of, you know, what tourism can actually bring. And I think a 3-year thing kind of smooths it out. People know, and we don't have this rush at the end of sort of what we would refer to as March money, where we're trying to sort of spend things which may not be effectively well spent. And I think we would support that. And it also means that businesses can look, can plan, and can say, well, you know, this is happening. And I think for you as an assembly, it allows us to have a sort of a certain amount of the budget set, so it's one more thing off the agenda, so you can concentrate on other things that are in there. Small business relief probably only hits a couple of hotels, but for us it is that ecosystem that sits there. Do you have a coffee shop to go to, a local retailer to buy your paper? You know, I give an example earlier of a retailer who sits opposite a large hotel. He told me that he loved people coming because, and I don't say this at all in a sexist way, that the husbands were dragged into his shop and forced to buy new clothes simply because they were there. And that is a very important thing, you know, that you have that. People can actually do something or go out and have something to see and do. So if that's the thing that's going to generate more business, that's good. But the budget for us will allow you to concentrate, get it settled, allow you to concentrate on other things, and allow the agencies that support us, Tourism Ireland and Tourism Northern Ireland, to have enough budget to go forward to do that.
And, you know, I think a multi-year budget's a no-brainer because ultimately in terms of your priorities in the programme for government, I mean, you've also the investment strategy as well. You know, it is so important. And that's why, you know, I reflect on 2 years of restoration. It's you know, we need to have a much more delivery, more nimble focused executive that does stuff, and a 3-year budget is so important to that whole delivery process. I think the one challenge that I would say that is the silo mentality of the executive, that does need to change. And I think that is probably the most frustrating thing in dealing with. Yes, individual ministers are doing some good things, and I've highlighted what Minister O'Dowd's doing in his own department, but as soon as you go across another different department of another party, that's when the problem lies, and there's that lack of joined up approach is absolutely needs to change.
Very, very good. Important message to leave it on. I suspect some people will be watching this and think, it might have been somewhat better if the Minister and the team had maybe thought of some of these things before the revaluation was published. And I know there was some engagement, but was it any point? I know there probably was some more tentative engagement with people ahead of the revaluation being published. Did the Minister indicate then, or the team or LPS indicate that they would be thinking about either transitional relief or indeed the small business rates, using the small business rates measure that the Minister wants to bring forward to offset the pressure of revaluation? Was that indicated ahead of the publication?
There were conversations around the consultation for the small business rate relief, and indeed we got an economist to do some modelling for us because I'm a great believer in data. Yeah. But I think the two were really connecting. You know, maybe in peripheral conversations about how one would work alongside the other. And I say it's like we did expect an increase. I think it was just the shock of the
number.
I mean, there wasn't any discussions that, I mean, the transitional relief wasn't there, or, you know, we raised that in successive revals, because obviously, you know, it is unfair that if you have a small business that has processed a significant increase and loses their 20% small business rate, that, you know, that is unfair, and that's where I think particularly the transitional arrangements or the traditional transitional fund would assist them with that, but that was not raised at any time with us.
I think, if I may, Chair, I don't think anybody's to blame. Okay. It is really the process took over.
Okay.
And we need to find a way just to sort that out.
We saw the list on the Wednesday and it came out on the Thursday, and I can understand maybe why you wouldn't want to show the list 3 weeks out. Because there's a question of leaks, but we actually saw the list on the Wednesday and the percentages, and I will say the LPS sent us the full list the next day when it was released with all the percentages on it, so we could see it. But there certainly was a sort of an informal indication of, you know, this is going to be significant.
Yeah.
Significant for us was 30 plus 15, which was 45-ish. Yeah. It wasn't 30 plus 53.
Okay, so essentially it was expecting an increase, but not expecting that big of an increase. Look, I take your point, Colin. I think you're right. Blame is never productive, notwithstanding my other role in this assembly. Accountability and responsibility is, however, important. So we will, I think, arising from this, want the Minister and the Department to be keeping us as a committee abreast of what the next steps are. And we may want to hear from your groups in the months ahead, either in written or in oral form, as we understand what's next. So please keep in touch with us on that in the next couple of months. So it may be useful for us to hear more, particularly if you are engaging more, if you're fleshing out your own proposals, and if you're hearing more from the Department and LPS. Obviously, this is still though it's paused, it's a very fast-moving pause if that doesn't defy the laws of physics. So thank you very much.
Oh, look, thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you.
Cheers. So, members, I think that's the key thing we need to get, following on, thank you, Colin, Glenn and Janice, is an indication from the Department of what and when is next, quite urgently, and also written as much notice and as much ongoing contact as possible, particularly because I think the interested stakeholders will be looking to this committee for us to keep abreast of this situation. Yes, and if we will forward the Hansard to LPS for their information, if members are content. Now, I'm going to skip over correspondence because we are now 5:20. And
be very quick, I think.
Very quick, okay. I am often blamed for I didn't ask most of the questions.
All correspondence duly noted.
I did not ask. I did not ask for the correspondence to be. I did not ask for the questions in that session. For the public record, we'll very briefly go through it then. 11.1 and 2 are Hansard transcripts there to note. 11.3 is the Youth Assembly, which is to note. Pivotal update, 2 years of assured executive, also to note. And finally, correspondence from the RSPB, swift nesting bricks in new buildings, very important, but it is to note, and members are content, we'll forward it to the department because it does relate to building materials, which is a part of the department's responsibility. Agenda item 12 is the draft forward work programme, which is page 650. 2 updates, the Public Office Accountability Bill, as I discovered yesterday when I asked the Minister about it, the debate is now not going ahead next week on the 9th. So we have no update on when that is going to take place, but I think we should reiterate to the department that we want to be kept abreast. Next estate strategy, there's an update agreed for after Easter, but the 27th of May is when we're now going to schedule to get more. I mean, the 27th of May is after Easter, so we're not fundamentally really changing well after. Okay. So members, there's a delegated legislation table at page 653 using information from the department. A schedule of expected delegated legislation has been prepared. The exact schedule will be updated on receipt of appropriate papers. It's just to note the volume of it.
Just one quick thing to add, Chair. Because of issues with Treasury. Our budget cycle process has moved a further week on, so SSE's voting account will not be until the week after we'd expect. So that is week beginning 26th. We had thought about not next week but the week after, but because members will recall that we need Westminster SSEs first before we can do ours, so that hasn't been sorted out yet, so it's pushed everything on a week.
Because it was in the schedule for the 16th, wasn't it?
So it's been pushed on a week. So Chair, that means we don't need to meet until 2 o'clock next week.
Indeed. So I'm going to come on and say that now. So first of all, agenda item 13 is any other business? Any other business? No. Okay. Agenda item 14 is date, time and place of next meeting. 2 p.m, not 1 p.m, here in the Senate chamber. I will then put the question. The committee is adjourned. The committee is adjourned.
Thank you.